Chapter 942. Translator, Henyi Translations Editor, Henyi Translations Shenren's keepsake Qin Yu raised his hand calmly. It seems that you still don't know your mistake. You don't even know how to admit defeat. Then you'll pay with your life. As soon as he finished speaking, the white bear died. An extremely powerful overlord in the polar region of the north died just like that. It was so easy that the pale man felt a little incredulous. But then, he was deeply frightened. The white bear had been his old enemy for many years. The strength of the man and the bear had always been on par. At this moment, Qin Yu killed the white bear so easily. Didn't that mean that Qin Yu had the ability to kill him at any time? It just depended on Qin Yu's mood. The feeling of being manipulated by others was really uncomfortable. But he had to give in. After hesitating for a while, he tried to show his sincerity. I was blind just now. I didn't see the essence of your strength. I'm deeply sorry for this. But I still have the lives of all my subordinates behind me. So no matter what you ask, please don't take my life so easily, because I still have responsibilities on my shoulders. Qin Yu looked at him for a while. He did seem very sincere. Then he asked him about the whereabouts of Kanshue Shenron. The pale man suddenly hesitated. But he suddenly thought of his current situation. No matter how bad it was, it couldn't be worse than now. Gritting his teeth, he told him some harmless news. He was the chief of one of the Aboriginals' clans. They had always believed in Kanshue Shenron and believed that Kanshue Shenron would bless them. It was a legend that originated from a long time ago. Even now, their tribe still kept a keepsake. It was the only keepsake because it was said that the other keepsakes had been used at other times. Seeing that his attitude was indeed quite sincere, Qin Yu spared him from death. If you can avoid death, you can't escape punishment. I'll charge you a certain price. Consider this matter settled. Then, without any explanation, he directly extracted a part of his strength. At this time, the pale man's strength had weakened a lot. Unable to resist, he could only watch helplessly as his strength continued to drop. Fortunately, in the end, his strength was not completely crippled, but he was definitely not an absolute powerhouse. Sensing the remaining strength in his body, he could only sigh and become even more respectful. That was because he knew better than anyone how heaven-defying it was to have such a powerful control over one's strength without damaging one's foundation while crippling one's strength. At least, he had never heard of such a thing before. Today was the first time he had seen it, and it was an eye-opener. Then, his attitude became even more respectful. The water-true dragon was an existence that could not be touched or seen. Although it was their lifelong belief, they still could not touch it. Such a powerful person didn't have any ill intentions towards them. Although he seemed to be doing things as he pleased, as long as he didn't touch his bottom line, it was still very negotiable. He welcomed them on behalf of his people. This was a room made of ice. It really couldn't get any more simple and crude. However, there was a huge space inside. The deeper they went, the thicker the ice became. Therefore, even if they dug a 1-meter-tall hole in the ice, there wouldn't be any cracks. There wouldn't be any cracks on the flat surface either. In fact, they could live very comfortably. The cold wind outside was bleak. Although this was a room made of ice, without the cold wind inside, it felt much more comfortable. Soon, the pale man went to put on a thick fur coat and walked out. The reason why he could fight the white bear shirtless before was because he was in a state of battle. It was also because he had decent strength at that time that could help him resist the cold wind. But now, his strength had decreased a lot. Not to mention resisting the cold wind, even staying in the room was a bit cold. Naturally, he had to find clothes that he hadn't worn in a long time and put them on. The conditions here were really simple, and there wasn't much to serve. It was just some frozen meat. Most of it was bear meat, rabbit meat, and some strange meat that they had never seen before. Of course, it could also be the meat of those fish monsters from before. The pale man was actually called Kang Ching. He was the chief of their small tribe. You want the token, but I need to discuss it with the big guy before I can give it to you. Also, the ancestor said before that if we don't encounter any danger of extermination, we can't use the token easily. What he meant was that he wasn't sure whether he could get it or not. But before, he had made a solemn vow and said it very confidently. It was as if he had already gotten the thing in his hands, so he could make such a promise so easily. Qin Yu smiled faintly. He didn't dwell on these trivial details with him. There was only one purpose for him to come here, to find Kanshue Shenron. Originally, he didn't want to find the real Kanshue Shenron here. He just wanted to find the real place where it was. Even if it was in other god realms, he could find a way to go there. After all, it was just crossing into the god realms. Kang Qing didn't dare to delay. He said that he would find someone else who could make the decision, so he went to find someone else. And he explained the cause and effect of the matter clearly. He had his own ideas, and when he spoke of them, he was open and honest. Since it helped us defeat the white bear and get rid of a hidden danger, it is our benefactor. Of course, we can't give the token away so easily, but we have no other choice. The situation is getting worse and worse. I want to use this final token to fight for more benefits for the people of our tribe. His idea was to use the last token that was said to be able to contact Kanshue Shenron in exchange for something to help them get through this cold season. When the weather warmed up a little, then the tribe, young and old, would be able to go out. When the time came, the periphery would be rich with water and grass, and they could go there to hunt. It was said that the outside world was very prosperous, and there were many super powerhouses who could destroy heaven and earth with a snap of their fingers. There were also mountains of resources flowing in. But here they were, incomparably barren. There was nothing. All the richness was covered by a thick layer of ice. Even mining was extremely difficult, and in the end, they had no choice but to give up. It was such a rare opportunity to exchange for a lot of things from these outsiders. Everyone fell into deep thought. If it was just an ordinary person, of course they wouldn't even think about it and would directly kick them out. But Qin Yu had done them a favor, and this favor had to be repaid. Chapter 943. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. If there was a way to repay this favor, it could also help his people gain a certain amount of profit. Wouldn't that be the best of both worlds? You want a sum of resources to help you get through this winter. Qin Yu repeated Kang Qing's request word by word. Kang Qing himself felt that this request was a little too much. He was the one who said that he would hand over the inheritance token. But now, not only did he keep delaying it, but he also wanted to get a sum of resources from the outside world from his benefactor. But this winter was really too difficult to get through. The winter in the north was extremely long. It was terrifyingly long. But this year's resources were extremely poor. Before winter came, they didn't even fill up the warehouse and store enough prey. Where is the warehouse where you store things? Take me there. Although the warehouse was an extremely important place. But now, they didn't have much in the warehouse. Kang Qing could make this decision himself. They left these houses made of ice blocks and walked 100 miles. There was an extremely thick layer of ice here. It was difficult to see with the naked eye. But Kang Qing's people had lived here for a very long time. After generations of accumulation, they knew every place like the back of their hand. In the end, they found the most suitable place to build a warehouse. Because the layer of ice here was thick enough, they could dig a large hole in the ice. They used extremely cold ice blocks to help them place their prey. If the meat was thrown into their specially built warehouse, it could be stored for a long time. It could be kept for more than a year without going bad. There was only one place here that wasn't made of ice, but it was made of ice blue stones that looked very similar to ice. It was covered in snow. Even if someone walked on it, they wouldn't be able to recognize it. In fact, it wasn't ice. Someone deliberately made a passage. Kang Qing didn't use any fancy moves. He directly opened the door with brute force. The huge underground warehouse was revealed. But when he went in, he realized that it was empty. There wasn't much in it. Compared to the huge space, the pitiful amount of food in the corner was too little. There were also hides and other things that took up a small space. But other than food and hides, there was nothing left. Kang Qing's greatest wish in life was to fill this warehouse. Every clan leader who sat in his position would have such thoughts and expectations. However, No one had ever done this before. Only in some distant legends would there be stories of warehouses being filled up. Kang Ching had always thought that it was just a legend. He saw countless items appear out of thin air in the warehouse. The exit they occupied became the only empty space in the area. Are these enough? If it's not enough, just add more. But you won't be able to store it here. Your warehouse is a little too small. As a warehouse, it was big enough. It was able to store all the people of their clan and survive the cold season in abundance. Kang Ching thought that the warehouse being filled to the brim was the limit of his imagination. But when he walked out in a panic, he saw a mountain made of all kinds of things appear on the ground out of thin air. He couldn't find words to describe the shock he felt. That's too much, we don't need that much. He had already made up his mind to take advantage of this opportunity to get as many things as possible. But these things had already exceeded his expectations. It was even dozens of times more. Such a huge amount. No matter how thick-skinned he was too embarrassed to ask for it. So he hurriedly said that it was enough. These things were enough for them to use for 2 winters. Moreover, they couldn't even fit in the warehouse. Qin Yu casually put away a small mountain made of all kinds of resources in front of him. There were a lot of coins and things that could be of use to these people. However, he had too many resources in his hands, and they were too varied. So he simply took them all out. Anyway, he didn't emphasize what kind of things he needed. Take a look and get someone to tidy it up. The warehouse should be filled with things that you can use. For example, the devil flame that could burn continuously. Or the warm robe made from the fur of immortal spirit beast powerhouses. There were countless things like that. Those big sects didn't have many really good things. So they took a lot of small things to make up the numbers. These things were only of medium quality. Just as Kang Ching saw, he was still holding something as tall as a mountain in his hand. Just filling up a warehouse was a drop in the bucket for him. Too much, too much. We can't use all these things at all. Although he said that, Kang Ching's face was full of excitement. The quality of these things was far beyond his imagination. Originally, he just wanted some charcoal that could be used for warmth and some carpets that could be spread on the ground for warmth. But without exception, these things were all of extremely high quality. Even with his current strength, the weapons in his hands couldn't compare to the value of the top 10 things in the warehouse. They had been poor for too long. These things were undoubtedly a huge sum of money that fell from the sky to them. It was enough to make them excited for a long time, and they might even party over it. The excited Kang Ching didn't immediately announce the good news to everyone. He only let a portion of the people know about it first. Then, he picked a few honest and strong young men to help him move out some of the supplies. At least he let everyone receive this benefit first. But now wasn't the right time to say that they had so many things in their hands. Otherwise, they would feel comfortable and want to stay at home all day. How could they train their bodies? They were people who had to live in the extreme north since they were born. Men, women, old, and young. All of them had to go out and hunt regularly. Everyone had their own division of labor. Even if they didn't get anything in the end, this was what they had to do every day. Everyone's bowls that were chiseled out of ice were filled to the brim with sweet and refreshing white wine. These high-quality white wines were naturally from that batch of supplies. None of the things that Qin Yu stored were of inferior quality. Even this seemingly ordinary white wine could strengthen one's physique. It had an excellent effect on their cultivation. But now, all the ordinary people were given a cup. It was a complete waste of this good wine. Chapter 944. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation summoning Shenren. If Qin Yu didn't mention it, no one would know how precious the wine was. Dong Qian used thousands of good materials and finally spent a few decades before he was barely able to brew this jar of mellow wine. A group of men, women, old, and young toasted each other, and the wine was emptied. The strong wine went down their throats. It went from the throat to the stomach. An endless warmth spread to his limbs and bones. Even the surrounding cold had become insignificant. Good wine. Why does it feel so good after drinking this wine? Maybe this is the good wine in the outside world. They brought out so many things. It seems that the outside world is really as prosperous as the rumors say. I heard that there is wealth everywhere. You can pick it up on the streets. What's a street? Oh, it's the kind of wide roads paved with bricks. People come and go. That's called a street. The simple natives knew very little about the outside world. When they saw the things that Chinyu brought them, they thought that the outside world was so prosperous. This wine was really good for the body. But it was also very sweet and intoxicating. It was conceivable that these weaker ordinary people would soon pass out after drinking a few glasses of wine. They didn't even know what they were talking about. They talked about the streets in the outside world. Then they talked about whether there was wealth everywhere. And they could pick it up casually. Then they talked about how the houses in the outside world were built with gold and silver. But as the leader of the tribe, Kang Ching didn't stop these discussions. He was even a little curious. He had never been to the outside world. He could only make some guesses from these speculations. So he didn't know whether these speculations were right or wrong. He listened with interest. He didn't reply and even asked Chinyu if there was really wealth everywhere outside and if there were experts all over the place. Of course, it's not as exaggerated as you said. He thought about everything that had happened since he arrived in the immortal world. Chinyu gave a certain answer. As long as you follow the prescribed order, you will soon find a way to heaven. As long as you don't fear danger and put in a lot of effort, you will be able to get what you want in the end. Maybe there will be some unexpected surprises in the end. In any case, although his journey was not smooth sailing, he had never encountered any danger that could make him afraid. All the experts in front of him had been dealt with by him. In the eyes of others, they were undefeatable existences. All of them had been destroyed by him. However, he had originally wanted to take things one step at a time and take it slow. Seeing how confident he was, Kang Ching couldn't help but want to go out and explore. Of course, he knew how difficult it was to reach the heavens in one step. That was something that was almost impossible. However, Chinyu had spoken too casually, and he had indeed been a little rude. So what if he wanted to explore the world? As long as he could bring back so many things that Chinyu had given him this time, even if he had to take the risk, it was worth it. After the celebration, Kang Ching pulled Chinyu to a relatively remote corner. He gave him a palm-sized disc. There were no patterns on the disc, only some simple whirlpools. However, if one looked carefully for a long time, one would be able to see layers of waves in these whirlpools. The waves kept surging and finally set off a huge wave that soared to the sky. Then, it slammed down heavily, creating a pit that was neither deep nor shallow on the surface of the water. The waves surged and formed a huge whirlpool at some point. At first, it was just a small dot, but later, it became bigger and bigger. Chinyu seemed to be able to feel the suction of the huge whirlpool from afar. However, at the last moment, he still withdrew his power. He also completely isolated the very faint traces of the whirlpool on it. This disc was indeed a little strange, but he was not sure if it could summon Kanshui Shenron. Why don't we try it now? There's no time like the present. Since I've obtained this disc today, why should I delay it? It's a world of ice and snow here, and everywhere is barren. Even if Shenron appears, no one will notice. Xuelan suddenly said. As she said, there was indeed no better environment than here. Kang Ching's eyes lit up slightly when he heard this. This was the best. He could also see what kind of god Kanshui Shenron was in the legends of his ancestors. How powerful was his real body? Then let's give it a try. Chinyu imbued his energy into the circular plate. Then, he gently pinched the disc into two very neat halves with his fingers. The fracture was extremely smooth, as if it had been cut directly with a sharp blade. At the moment when the disc was broken, there was a slight fluctuation in the air. Then, this trace of fluctuation crossed countless time and space. This caused the divine dragon in the other world to open its eyes. He had been in a deep sleep. But now, he felt the call and opened his eyes. But you are calling me. The voice passed through the ages. It came slowly. It came to this world. But no one knew the true face of the dragon god. Shenron's voice came first before his position. And through such a long distance, it was still so clear. There was no doubt that it must be a legendary existence. The sky was broken like a mirror. An extremely huge figure appeared. This figure could not be described with any words. It was so huge that it occupied the entire sky. However, everyone could only look at this figure with reverence. Shenron looked at every creature on the glacier with calm eyes. Everything in the world was in his eyes. They were all equal. But the people who summoned him were particularly different. This token could summon him. Often, some people wanted to put forward conditions to him. Maybe they wanted to achieve the purpose of the transaction, or they wanted to get something from him. There were also some people who went crazy and wanted to sacrifice something to him. But he had already dealt with those who had brought disaster to the world. If it was just a normal and ordinary transaction, it wasn't a big deal. But this time, it was a little different from any other summons in the past. This time, Shenron saw a person whose strength did not match his realm at all. An extremely special existence. He had never seen such a special existence. But Shenron had not forgotten the purpose of his visit this time. Who summoned me? Under Kang Qing's excited and expectant gaze, Qin Yu smiled and took a step forward. He sized up a powerful existence without hesitation. Shenron's aura was distant and mighty, but it was not aggressive. He looked at everything the same way. In his eyes, everything in the world was equal. Chapter 945. It was as if everything in the world, even a snowflake, was no different from every life in his eyes. Was the so-called path to becoming a god of the supreme great path like this? Even though Qin Yu admires such an expert and also admires him for being able to treat everything in the world the same, he does not agree with such complete ruthlessness. There were many interesting things in the world. If one pursued strength, they could only maintain such a cold state. They were not interested in anything in the world. They regarded all life in the world as their descendants. It was just too boring. If one reached the highest realm, this was the attitude. Then why did they pursue such great strength? I summoned you. I want a drop of your essence blood. I think one day you will crawl at my feet. Kanshui Shenron's gaze still did not change. He was just a little surprised to hear such an outrageous condition today. In the past, there were some conditions for him to help the holder of the token do something. These things might be extremely cruel. Or maybe it was just the holder of the token. In order to satisfy his own selfish desires, he wanted to cause suffering in the world. He originally thought that he had heard that he had to destroy a part of the world. This was already the most ridiculous statement he could hear. But now, he heard an even more ridiculous statement. You want me to submit to you? Do you know what kind of existence I am? Offer his essence blood. What was the difference between this and taking the initiative to submit? Every drop of essence blood was extremely important. Especially for the Dragon Clan. That was their strength, their life, and their everything. Qin Yu's words were undoubtedly arrogant to him, asking him to kneel down and call him master. You don't understand how powerful Shenron is. I can easily destroy everyone here. Even this glacier can be melted with a single thought from me. Qin Yu shook his head. He already had some guesses about this and had some understanding of it. He was not as ignorant as Kanshui Shenron thought. It's you who don't understand. Kanshui Shenron stared at the arrogant man in front of him, who made him want to laugh maniacally. But gradually, he couldn't laugh anymore. At his current level, he had long been able to rely on his intuition to do many things. Now, he truly felt it. It was a mysterious feeling. It was as if the young man in front of him was looking at him confidently. Indeed, he would be able to fulfill his promise one day. One day, he would really be able to trample the dragon god under his feet. It was even possible that these dragon gods would bow down to him. Therefore, he did not laugh. As long as I give you a drop of essence blood, this matter will end here, right? Kang Qing's eyes retreated again and again. He looked at Qin Yu, who was still calm and composed, as if he was not surprised at all. The shock in his heart was like a tidal wave, almost drowning him. The mighty Kanshui Shenron had compromised. Just now, he was still shocked by Qin Yu's request. But now, he couldn't say a single word. To think that there would be a day when such a powerful existence would compromise. You're wrong. This time, I have indeed come for your essence blood. I have a token in my hand, and you need to meet my condition. Qin Yu stood in a world of ice and snow. Beside him stood a person like ice and snow. It was as if everything else in the world did not exist. Kanxue Shenron had never seen such an arrogant person. But inexplicably, he really believed it. Because of those extremely bright eyes, because of the calm aura around him. He had seen countless people lie in front of him, using all kinds of reasons and excuses, but without exception, they would never have such bright eyes. Nor would they look directly into his eyes. Because every Shenron was absolutely part of the whole, and it could even be said that Shenron itself was out of his control. Their every move was enough to affect the ninefold God realm. It could bring earth-shaking changes. So Shenron had been dormant at the end of the world. In the end, Kanxue Shenron still left. Before leaving, he left a few words for Qin Yu. My origin essence blood contains extremely great power, Yang Kai said with a smile. If I give it to you now, I'm afraid it's too late. Why don't you come to me when you're stronger? If you have the strength then, you can go to the water realm to find the top of Nanshan Mountain. I'll live there for a long time. If you have the strength and ability, come to me. Then I'll definitely come to fulfill my promise today. After saying these words, Kanxue Shenron left directly. At the top of Nanshan Mountain in the water realm. Was this the strength of the strong? This was the true strength of the true God realm, and there might even be stronger experts. After all the people of the major sects were all cheated and suffered heavy losses, another major event happened. For some reason, a piece of the sky suddenly broke. There were countless chaos demons in the void. They were not people of the dark realm, nor were they abyssal creatures. They had never even been recognized. At this time, these guys could only hide in the void. If it wasn't for the fact that a piece of the sky suddenly broke, it would never be their turn to show up. But after these Mother of Chaos appeared, they burned, killed, looted, and sucked human flesh and blood. They even captured many women for reproduction. All of a sudden, a large number of low-level chaos fiends gushed out. At first, when the sky collapsed, everyone wanted to fill the hole. But later on, he found out how difficult it was to patch up the sky. They could only use the legendary mud of all creation. Purple cloud stone. Green cloud axe. None of them could be missing. All of these things had to be used as materials to fill the sky. But now, who could take out so many things? There was no one in this world who could take out so many divine objects. In fact, no one even knew the reason for this. Why did a corner of the sky suddenly collapse? Everyone was panicking. Qin Yu was in the extreme north and only learned of this news last. Now, purple cloudstone, green cloud axe. They had all been gathered. These were the collections of the ancestors of the major sects. They had always been enshrined as divine objects. But now the world was in chaos. If they didn't take out these things, the entire immortal realm would be destroyed. Even if they could still catch their breath by then, who could guarantee that they would survive? These chaos fiends could really leave as they wished. Now that they were developing so quickly, it would be too late by the time everyone wanted to fight back. Everyone could only speed up. But now, they were still missing the most important mud of all creation. This was the most important thing. Chapter 946. Legend had it that the mud of all creation was the first piece of soil to appear at the beginning of heaven and earth. It contained the power of the entire world, and it was this small piece of soil that turned into all things in the world. Only such a divine object could mend the heavens. However, the immortal world was vast and boundless. Where could one go to find the legendary mud of all creation? Now that the immortal world had grown to such an extent, even if the mud of all creation still existed, it would be extremely rare. Moreover, there were no traces of the mud of all creation in the various large sects and factions. Even if such a divine object really existed in this world, there was no way to quickly find it in a short period of time. When Qin Yu heard the name of the mud of all creation, he suddenly thought of a certain old man who had been missing for a long time. If he wasn't wrong, it seemed that Shentian Senzun had a piece of the mud of all creation. At that time, Shentian Senzun had solemnly vowed that he had taken away all the mud of all creation. Moreover, after countless years of change, the mud of all creation had long become one and even had its own consciousness. The mud of all creation could choose whether it wanted to sacrifice its life for the world. If all the mud of all creation in the immortal world had been taken away by Shentian Senzun, didn't that mean that if they couldn't find this old man, they wouldn't be able to resolve the crisis before them? Xuelan looked at the huge hole in the sky with a solemn expression. Extremely powerful monsters would come out of the dark hole. These monsters would spread and wreak havoc in the surroundings in a short period of time. Moreover, as time passed, she didn't know if it was just her imagination. It seemed that the huge crack in the sky had expanded by a lot. Where exactly did Master go? Qin Yu brought Xuelan all the way back. Because their speed was relatively slow, in order to speed up and reach the disaster area as quickly as possible, he had his clone appear again and bring the two of them there. This was the first time he and his clone appeared at the same time. They were clearly the same person, but they had two different perspectives. This was a strange feeling. It wasn't that the scene in front of him was split into two, but that he could clearly see his other self through it. However, ignoring this strange feeling, their speed was still extremely fast. Needless to say, the clone's strength had already reached the pinnacle. If there were no true gods in this world, the strength of the clone would be unparalleled. He could even compete with Shentian Senzun. A doppelganger brought them over quickly. In less than a quarter of an hour, they had arrived at the disaster area from the depths of the extreme north. This place was close to the south. They had traversed more than half of the immortal realm, but it had only taken a quarter of an hour. Of course, the clone consumed a lot of energy. Although the doppelganger was extremely powerful, it was not without limitations. It would require an enormous amount of resources to be replenished. It was extremely difficult to find a crystal that was as powerful as the blood amber and contained an enormous amount of energy. Therefore, he could only use quantity. In just 15 minutes, he had used up a small portion of his mountain-like resources. If it was a battle, it would only be used more often. However, it was clear that these resources had been used in the right places. By the time they arrived, Chaos Devils were already wreaking havoc everywhere. As far as the eye could see, the ground was covered in ruins. These big sects have such a huge amount of resources, but none of them are doing anything. Qin Yu was particularly angry. Those sects actually did not send people to clean up the area and only surrounded the periphery. But what was the use? He saw with his own eyes how the elite disciples of a certain sect were flustered when facing the Chaos Devils. In the end, they all died in the mouths of the Chaos Devils. The ground was covered in bright red. One by one, the disciples of the sects who were dressed in bright and beautiful clothes could only scream and hide in all directions. However, their screams only made the Chaos Devils even more excited. These Chaos Devils did not have any rationality. The more the prey they had set their eyes on struggled, the more it would arouse their killing intent. It was easy to imagine that these fleeing disciples would only lead the Chaos Fiend to a place further away from the Chaos Fiend. At that time, the disaster area would be even more serious. Wherever the Chaos Devils came into contact with the Chaos Devils, if they dealt with it according to the way they dealt with it, they would definitely seal and isolate it. This would only cause the disaster situation to worsen. When the Chaos Devils were done wreaking havoc here, they would turn to attack the sect disciples that isolated them. This was yet another vicious cycle that repeated itself over and over again. In an extremely short period of time, they had already lost many cities. If they went further in, they would be closer to the center. If they spread in other directions, they would also reach the Cloud Immortal City that Qin Yu had been to before. You stay here and look after these ordinary people. I'll go and kill them all. These Chaos Devils dare to be so presumptuous in front of me. All of them are courting death. After Qin Yu rushed into the crowd, he heard countless pleas, screams, and the strange laughter of the Chaos Devils. All the sounds blended together to form a disgusting movement. A sword. A slash. All the voices stopped. The Chaos Devils could smell the blood of their own kind. They all stopped what they were doing. They looked at Qin Yu at the same time with great tacit understanding. The ordinary people who could still move quickly ran away, even if they more or less had a certain level of cultivation. If they could raise their weapons, they were not without the ability to resist. But none of them had the guts. Or rather, all of them were scared out of their wits. They did not even dare to raise their weapons to resist. Just like that, they were seriously injured. Kill, 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 kill all the chaos fiends. Countless chaos devils all rushed forward. Qin Yu did not know how many times he had raised his hands. He did not know how long he had been fighting. Until his hands were a little numb. Until everything in front of him became calm. Only then did he stop his hands. The ground was covered in the blood of the chaos devils and the twisted corpses of the chaos devils. Is it finally over? But it's not enough. Since you dared to rush in, you must be prepared to never return. Xuelan stood at the back and watched Qin Yu's figure bathed in blood. She lowered her head and looked at her jade-like fingers. Suddenly, she moved. With a casual wave of her hand, an ice-blue ribbon appeared. She tied up all the injured people nearby. She transferred them to a safe place. She also gave them some medicine for their injuries. With her clone here, no one dared to have any ideas about her. In the end, it even attracted a lot of praise from everyone. But they would never know that those who were brave enough to fight at the front and win every battle were truly worthy of admiration. Chapter 947. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Xuelan didn't argue with them. Occasionally, she would stare blankly into the distance. Once you return, you'll see that the rear has been properly arranged. She wanted to travel side by side with Qin Yu. So she had to work hard. Another extremely powerful chaos fiend had died by his hand. This was already another one. Qin Yu couldn't even remember how many chaos demons he'd killed. But after the chaos demons fell one by one, he would take a few deep breaths from time to calm himself down. He didn't want to become a monster immersed in killing. Ever since he received the Shura's countless years of inheritance, his murderous nature had grown stronger. Anyone who made him unhappy, as long as they were his enemies, he wanted to kill them all. Now that he was on the battlefield, his murderous nature greatly increased his strength. But he would never be swayed by any emotion other than his own. Since he'd learned the Shura's inheritance, it should be used by him, not used to influence him. The terrifying murderous intent in Qin Yu's eyes gradually receded, returning him to his usual calmness. This mood couldn't affect him at all. It couldn't even make him make any decisions that went against common sense. Not far away, a powerful aura rippled. It seemed to be about as strong as the chaos demon he'd just killed. If converted to the immortal realm's power level, it should have reached the holy ruler realm. Another one? I wonder who fought him to a draw. When he went over, he realized it was someone he knew. Huarong was in a hurry to fight this extremely ferocious opponent, so she didn't notice the details around her. But there was one piece of information she couldn't forget. Because Qin Yu had Qi Yang's aura. And it was extremely dense. To her, it was a very special existence. Why are you here? It's very dangerous here. It's very dangerous here. If you want to help, then retreat to the back. All the chaos demons here have reached an extremely powerful level. Of course, there weren't many of them. But every opponent was very troublesome. No one knew how many chaos demons there were in the void. In short, ever since the big hole in the sky, there had been an endless supply. In a moment of distraction, the chaos demon in front of Huarong opened its ferocious teeth, covered in saliva. It was about to bite Huarong's throat. It was too late for Huarong to dodge now. She could only use this cruel method to protect herself. But just after she'd done all her preparations, the chaos demon, which was only a hair's breadth from her, suddenly stopped all its movements. His body stiffened as he fell to the ground, twitching slightly. A moment later, he completely stopped breathing. Qin Yu indifferently withdrew his hand. A dark red light flashed in his eyes. There seemed to be some dark veins on his blood-stained hand. However, it soon disappeared without a trace. Your strength. Only now did Huarong notice how fast his strength had increased. Clearly, the strength that he had seen before could only be considered ordinary. She s her was translation her she translation in translation to her to translation. Her translation had become an extremely powerful expert. He wasn't any weaker than her. You can actually fight across so many realms. You're only at the peak of the immortal soul realm. But you can fight against sage kings. He'd crossed 2 realms. For ordinary people, it was already extremely difficult to cross a small realm. But now, he'd crossed 2 realms. That was 2 realms. Huarong didn't know what to say. She couldn't possibly admire her son's good taste at such a dangerous time. He'd caught the most talented human in one go. He was even the most talented in the immortal world. In any case, if a powerful expert suddenly appeared at such a dangerous time, it would be impossible for him to escape. It would be of great help to the battle. After that, Huarong saw what an earth-shattering change was. She was shocked at first, then slightly surprised, and then completely indifferent. After all, this was Qin Yu. He was extraordinary and had extremely powerful strength. Wasn't that normal? It wasn't strange after seeing so much. If you kill a chaos devil here, you'll be rewarded by all the major sects and factions working together. You've already killed countless chaos fiends, and quite a few of them were extremely powerful. Logically speaking, you should be able to receive a huge amount of resources. If you have time, you can also go and claim your own reward. Qin Yu's expression was a little strange. It seemed that not long ago, he'd asked for an extremely rich amount of resources from all the major sects and factions. He didn't expect them to have recovered in such a short time. And they'd even taken out an extremely large amount of resources. Out of curiosity, he asked what the so-called rewards were. Huarong thought for a moment, then gave an example and told him some of the things she'd received. Actually, this was a reward. It was especially used as an incentive for the people below. For people of their realm, these rewards weren't very important. But some extremely precious materials were still enough to make experts take action. Those who were watching from the sidelines quickly jumped out and took the initiative to help them solve this problem. As expected, I didn't take out my own assets at that time. It could only make them feel a little heartache. In this way, he didn't feel guilty at all. He did everything openly. Even if he faced those people from the major factions again, he wasn't afraid at all. However, there were very few people who knew him. There were very few people who could recognize him. And they were servants who had signed a contract with him. They wished that they would never see this master of theirs. That way, they wouldn't have to listen to others' orders. Long time no see. How have you been recently? Qin Yu saw a lot of familiar-looking people here. He saw someone trying to sneak away from the crowd. So, he took the initiative to greet him. Huarong happened to know that person, so she took the initiative to greet him. Yang Xianjun, I didn't expect you to know him. Yang Xianjun kept screaming in his heart, wanting to escape. But because of the master-servant contract, he had to stop when Qin Yu told him to. He couldn't hesitate at all. So, he was forced to stay. He acted as if he'd known him for a long time. Everyone who had signed the contract couldn't resist Qin Yu's orders. Chapter 948. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The contract between master and servant maintained life. Once it was established, if one wanted to repent, one had to pay the price with one's life. But since one could sign this contract, they were all cowards. Even if they were greedy for life and afraid of death, they would forever be controlled by others and could only listen to the orders of one person. It's really been a long time. I don't know much about what happened before. He was really shocked. If not for this, he would not have been able to imagine a person who was just a mystic immortal not long ago. He could actually toy with all the major forces in the immortal world. However, Huarong, who stood to the side, did not have any of that. She even felt that she was introducing Qin Yu in high spirits. Her words were full of admiration and praise. Yang Shenjuan's heart was full of bitterness. He still had to smile and go along. Because of the contract, he could not even show the slightest bit of unhappiness. Even his emotions were controlled by others and could not be controlled. He's really a young talent. At such a young age, with such cultivation, He can actually make so many contributions. Don't worry. Since he's an acquaintance, I naturally have to give him the highest reward. Moreover, such a young talent naturally has to be publicized to the world. It can be considered as an encouragement and a role model. Huarong was relieved after hearing this. With the further recognition of Qin Yu, she was even glad that her son had recognized such a strong person as his master early on. His future was obviously limitless. Now that he had such a good fortune in such a short time, no matter what setbacks he faced in the future, at the very least, he would be stronger than a sage king. If he could become Senzun, he would be the second most powerful person in the entire immortal world. The Millennium Frost Plume Flower. The Millennium Stalactite. The Eastern Kasyapa Tree. These extremely precious heavenly treasures of heaven and earth were already among the rewards that the major sects could take out. They were very good. It was enough to stand out among all the rewards. Seeing so many beautiful and coveted treasures, he couldn't help but drool. Everyone could not help but be a little restless. Who was it that had such great ability to obtain so many good rewards? Someone was behind this and gave all the good things to someone they knew. Was this person really worthy of such good treasures and resources when school started? Yang Xianjun took a step forward. Although his strength was not considered to be the best among the crowd, he was the one in charge of this matter, and he also had some status. Ever since he escaped from the mysterious dragon clan, the sect had arranged many lucrative jobs for him in order to compensate them. He had placed him in an important position, so now he could even manage some experts who were stronger than him. Therefore, when he stood out, the crowd immediately quieted down. There were no longer so many whispers. If you can achieve the same results as him, killing 3 Saint Kings and countless Chaos Demons in a short period of time, then all of you will also receive such generous rewards and rewards. Under the surveillance of so many great powers, how could anyone possibly cheat? Instead of being jealous of other people's gains, why don't you go out and make more contributions? Then, come back and ask me for the rewards you want. Once these words came out, everyone was speechless. With so many battle achievements in front of them, even if they still had some complaints in their hearts, who could say anything? Their strength was only slightly higher than that of the others. No one would take the risk to test Qin Yu's strength personally. Qin Yu already had these things in his hands. But after all, it was still a bonus. Even if he did not use them himself, he could give them to Huarong or use them to exchange for information. It was also very convenient. Although they were worthless in his eyes, many people were scrambling for them. Who asked these things to be priceless treasures in their eyes? Even Yang Xianjun was extremely envious after seeing them. Although he had such a lucrative job, he could not easily touch these rewards that were going to be given out. If he really dared to touch them, the sect might not be able to protect him. One had to know that there were many great powers in the immortal world here. All the big and small powers. All of them had to support this matter this time. The strong contributed, and the rich contributed. No one could escape this responsibility. Even the weaklings who had no abilities had to escape quickly to prevent themselves from becoming a breeding ground for the Chaos Demons. Suddenly, a jade box was placed in front of Yang Xianjun. Before he could happily take it, he saw a hand pressing on the jade box. He could only stop all his actions and look at the owner of this hand, Qin Yu, with some confusion. What are we missing now? What is the attitude of the great sects towards this hole in the sky? Tell me everything truthfully. If you tell me enough details, the things in this jade box will belong to you. This was a 10,000-year-old milkstone. It just so happened that it was extremely useful to him. If he used this rare treasure of heaven and earth that could only be seen once in 10,000 years, then he would be able to break through his current realm. He might even be able to break through to the higher realm of the Holy King. Yang Xianjun didn't even think about it carefully before she told him everything she knew. Originally, he had no way to resist everything that came from Qin Yu. Now that he was able to obtain a huge benefit while completing the order, what could be more relaxing than this? He did not even resist all the orders. If he could obtain a benefit every time he completed an order, then there was no need for him to refuse these benefits at all. Now, all the great and small factions in the world of immortals treated the hole in the sky the same way. They wanted to fill the hole. But now that they couldn't find the mud of all creation, someone proposed to use countless lives as a sacrifice to set up a huge formation. They wanted to kill all the chaos demons that had intruded. But in the end, this would lead to all the fertile and barren lands around the crack becoming a land of death with no vitality. Moreover, this method could only deal with the symptoms but not the root cause. It could only kill the chaos demons that were causing trouble, but it could not fill the huge hole in the sky. Thus, the world of immortals was still in dispute. Some people even proposed to wake up all the ancestors of the major sects. Let these old monsters who had not stepped into the world for countless years take action. Of course, the latter was more reliable. But those old monsters who had not appeared in the world for countless years were all either exhausted or in seclusion to break through. If they were forcefully interrupted, it would damage the foundations of the various sects. Chapter 949. Even at such a time, there was still no end to the dispute. Some people even said that the mysterious expert who suddenly appeared could be an opportunity. Now, because of the sudden appearance of this huge hole and the series of unforeseen events, all the major forces were already in a terrible fix. The main reason was that they did not have enough manpower to control all of this. The speed at which the Mother of Chaos was spreading was too fast. If there was no absolute expert, there was no way to control the situation. In fact, at the beginning, they still had the upper hand, so not many people cared. Who knew that there would be a huge hole in the back that would be constantly replenished? Then, these chaos demons appeared faster and faster, and their numbers increased. Then, countless experts began to descend, causing great destruction. Currently, more than 10 cities were in trouble. Some had even become the world of the chaos demons. The situation was terrible. In the end, the idea of looking for Master was left unresolved. It seems that some experts from some sects who can be awakened will appear soon. One of them is the Shen Holy Master of the Shen sect. It's said that he has already left the Holy Ruler realm, and is only one step away from Senzun. That's why he has the name Holy Master. He was only one step away from becoming an immortal venerable. That meant that he was still only a Holy Ruler realm. Such a person could only be of limited use here. He could only be used to stall for time. It could be seen how barren the immortal realm was now. However, I heard that there is another Holy Master in the Shen sect who is about to break through, and it's going to happen soon. If he makes a move, perhaps a miracle will happen. In the current world, a holy ruler was enough to dominate an area, and Senzun was even more powerful. Otherwise, Shenron, who had suddenly appeared and no one knew him, would not have been able to deceive so many people so easily. The main reason was that they were too eager for the appearance of an expert. So much so that when such an expert really appeared, they did not even have any doubts. Even after they were severely scammed. There were still people who wanted to find that mysterious expert to help them solve this crisis. Yang Xianjun was also a little worried about this. Thus, he asked Qin Yu if he had a way to solve the problem. Of course, he knew who had the spirits of all things and who had enough materials to mend the sky, but he couldn't find anyone. It will appear when it's time to appear. The immortal world is so big. Can't we find a solution? The collapse of the sky this time was really strange. Even if the world of immortals was in danger of being destroyed, Shenron would not sit idly by. However, in the void, the two Shenrones stared at each other. It was a pure and flawless white divine dragon. He looked at Kanshue Shenron, who had just left. The bright Shenron that had always protected the immortal world. He was awakened when a part of the sky collapsed. He didn't intend to ignore it. He just wanted to find the source of everything. The source of all this was Kanshue Shenron. Because he suddenly appeared and suddenly left. Plus a series of coincidences. Which led to such a big commotion. If it had been before, it would have been fine. But now, the world was not as prosperous as before. It had become much more barren. It was very difficult to gather materials. You are destroying the entire immortal world. Why did you come to my immortal world when you had nothing to do? Why didn't you stay in your water realm? Shenron asked in a calm tone. The danger facing the entire immortal world was not very important in his eyes. But if he didn't intervene in the current situation, it would be very difficult to achieve self-recovery. Just this matter alone would cause the immortal world to be silent for a long time. Everyone in the immortal world had suffered heavy losses. Even his power had been somewhat affected. Kanshue Shenron looked at this old friend he hadn't seen for many years. He didn't expect that there would be so much trouble after he left. But now, he only used an extremely calm tone to tell Shenron to lay low and not interfere too much. If you interfere too much, it will be like wind and thunder. In the end, you will end up like that. You won't even be able to hide in the two realms. Everything has its own destiny. Even you and I can't interfere too much. We have great power, and we have to control ourselves. You say it's all because of me. I don't accept it. You'd better think about whether or not you want to interfere. Regardless of the fact that we were born at the same time, you'd better not interfere. The world has its own cycle. In the end, the entire ninefold God realm would be destroyed. As time passed, this world of nothingness would give birth to a new world. Finally, it would evolve into a new world. When the time came, perhaps 9 new Shenron would be born. Although that should be a long, long time in the future, they couldn't stop the will of heaven. Shenron seemed to be a little angry, but because he didn't have too many superfluous emotions, he left immediately even though he was angry. Kanshue Shenron had originally wanted to tell him that a new variable had appeared in the immortal world. As he watched Shenron's departing figure, he also left indifferently. Faced with countless choices, Shenron chose to leave immediately and didn't want to hear anything more. That was also the destiny of the unseen. There was no need for him to take the initiative to chase after her and explain everything clearly. After wandering around outside for a long time, he finally got his things back. Shen-Tien Senzun suddenly felt that someone was calling out to him. It was an extremely mysterious feeling, and only someone he trusted could call out to him in this almost telepathic way. The only person he trusted in this world was the disciple he'd cultivated since childhood. He was also the disciple he was most proud of. It seems that I have to end things early. I'll let these guys linger on for a while longer. Shen-Tien Senzun casually opened a door to the void. Of course, his strength couldn't support him in crossing the two realms in a single step. However, he also had the ability to accurately travel through the void. Countless monsters hidden in the void pounced on Shen-Tien Senzun when they saw him again. But in the end, they all died at his hands. Until Shen-Tien Senzun saw a huge hole. Through this hole, he saw the chaotic immortal world below. Qin Yu finished his summoning. Feeling something, he raised his head and looked at the medium-sized hole above his head. He saw an extremely small white figure. Chapter 950. An even more powerful void demon had arrived. This unique and invincible void demon was comparable to Senzun. Even Lord Shen-Tien, who was sent out later, could only temporarily delay and stop such a powerful force. When the Lord Shen-Tien took action, someone asked all unrelated people to temporarily retreat from this dangerous place. Qin Yu was among the crowd, and he was the only one who did not move. Everyone just glanced at him and then went back to doing their own things. Under the arrival of such a powerful existence, who would care about others? Originally, people in the immortal world could cut off love in order to improve their strength. They would still have some feelings for people they were familiar with. Towards strangers, he would ignore them. No one would remind a stranger to quickly leave such a dangerous place. Lord Shen-Tien, who was the hope of everyone, sent out his magic treasure. It was a painting of mountains and rivers and beauties. It had a simple and strong aura mixed with a trace of floral fragrance. Suddenly, all the beauties in the painting moved. They carried the power of mountains and rivers. Outside the painting, they used themselves as a formation. It trapped the Chaos Devil in the immortal venerable realm. Demon, go to hell. You dare to come to the immortal world and cause chaos in the world. Today, I will show you the strength of the immortal world. An old man with a ruddy face and snow-white hair. As he muttered to himself, he continuously formed one hand seal after another. Seeing that he had achieved his goal of trapping the Chaos Demon, he suddenly pulled out an immortal sword from somewhere. He directly attacked the Chaos Demon's weak point. Just as the sword pierced the Chaos Demon's weak point, everyone present heard a scolding voice that seemed to come from afar. "How stupid! You didn't even properly inquire about the characteristics of the Senzun's Chaos Demon, and you actually dared to directly attack." Before Saint Master Shentian had time to think about what he meant, the Saint Master of the mysterious Heaven sect had already spoken. The Chaos Demon that should have stopped breathing and fallen stiffly to the ground. Suddenly, it turned into countless pieces and split into several Chaos Demons. Although they were still a little young, they were Senzun's Chaos Demon without a doubt. Ever since he was born, he had looked at Holy Sovereign Shen Tian with hatred. With great tacit understanding, they surrounded Holy Master Shentian and attacked him from various angles. Not long after, his body was already covered with injuries. Even though he was holding an immortal sword in his hand, it was impossible for him to display his full strength. Once they were hit, they would be drenched in blood. At this moment, his heart was filled with despair. In such a critical situation, the situation was extremely dangerous. It was obvious that he would not be able to hold on for long. Although the title of the Lord sounded nice, it was far inferior to Senzun. Qin Yu stood in the distance, but he could see everything. Although the profound Heaven Holy Master seemed to be in a bad situation, the fluctuations around him were getting stronger and stronger. He had already accumulated an extremely deep foundation. If he could suddenly make a breakthrough in a hurry, it would be a wonderful thing. This was even better news for the vast battlefield. Therefore, Shentian Senzun, who was standing high above, only gave a slight reminder. He watched as Holy Sovereign Shen Tian, who had the same title as him, continued to fight with those monsters. It's better to rely on myself than on others. I'm going to fight you guys to the end. I've been so cautious and conscientious, but I still have to die in the hands of you little things. In the end, Holy Sovereign Shen Tian was forced to the extreme and had no choice but to erupt. The aura around him had already reached a critical point. At this moment, he completely erupted, setting off a huge wave of air that rolled like clouds and seas. The Chaos Demons around him were pushed dozens of meters away. The aura on his body also rose rapidly after this huge fluctuation. It rose at the highest speed and finally broke through a bottleneck. He had finally reached the realm that he had always dreamed of. However, even if he broke through, there were still many wounds on his body. His previous experience of failure and the sudden reminder had already made him understand. Facing a Chaos Demon at Senzun's realm, even if he attacked its weakness and killed it, there would be endless trouble in the future. Therefore, he was limited everywhere. In the end, he could only raise his head and shout. "I beg the unknown senior to give me a few more pointers." No matter how he shouted, the voice just now disappeared. The fact that Shentian Senzun could remind him and let him break through his current realm was already extremely benevolent. This huge hole reminded him of something. In the end, Shentian Holy Master retreated. He could no longer hold on. Even if he continued to be brave, he would only die in the hands of these guys. "I didn't expect that after not seeing each other for so many years, you wouldn't even recognize my voice." Shentian Senzun slowly walked down step by step. Those chaos fiends tried to attack him, but he easily grabbed their weakest spots. Then, they all gathered together and were reduced to ashes by a bolt of divine lightning. Hearing this familiar voice, Shentian Holy Master was slightly in disbelief. The owner of that voice had disappeared for tens of thousands of years. It had been so long that all of them had forgotten that there was once such an amazing person. Qin Yu understood. Sure enough, the Shentian sect was still related to Shentian Senzun. However, so what? He had originally asked around to find someone. Now that he had found the person, how was the Shentian sect? They no longer had anything to do with him. Ever since Shentian Senzun had arrived, the situation had instantly reversed. All the Chaos Demons could not hold on for more than a breath of time under his hands. In just a few words, he had already let everyone know that this powerhouse who had suddenly appeared had some grudges with the Shentian sect. Therefore, the people in the distance hesitated, not knowing if they should go forward. After all, The Shentian sect was one of the top sects in the immortal world. If they offended him, they might not be able to get any benefits. However, Shentian Senzun did not care about what these people thought. He only glanced coldly at his old friend and walked in front of Qin Yu. A gentle smile bloomed on his face, completely different from before. Disciple, you've made good progress during this period of time. It seems that you've become much stronger. Why didn't you go find Senzun's chaos demons to practice with? With your current strength, even if you can't defeat them, you can definitely retreat easily. Besides, don't you still have Master? Although he did not know where Shentian Senzun had gone during this period of time, the aura on his body had become stronger. Even if he was just standing there, it was as if he had become one with heaven and earth. However, it was clear that he was powerful and unsurpassable. He seemed to have thought of something. Shentian Senzun took out a small bell that had been silent all this time. Chapter 951. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. This thing should be of some use to you. It's fine. You can play with it. Qin Yu didn't even look at it and directly accepted it. As the saying went, one should not refuse an elder's gift. No matter what it was, since it was given to him by his master, he would accept it. On the other hand, the Shentian Saint Venerable looked at the bell in disbelief. In his memory, the bell was very famous. However, it had been missing for tens of thousands of years along with the disappearance of the Shentian Saint Venerable. It was not that no one wanted to look for it during such a long time. However, no one could find the real whereabouts of the bell in the end. However, such a divine item was given to Qin Yu so casually. Even though he had been missing for tens of thousands of years, the Shentian Senzun was not as poor as they thought. In fact, he was even stronger than before. No one knew what had happened during such a long time, but the Shentian Saint Venerable still walked over and addressed him as Grandmaster. The Shentian Senzun did not agree. Instead, he glanced at the Saint Venerable and said indifferently, "The Shentian Saint Venerable doesn't sound right to you. The name Shen Tian doesn't suit you. You should change it." There was no room for discussion, but the profound Heaven Holy Venerable did not dare to say anything. In terms of seniority, no one in the entire Shentian sect was more senior than the Shentian Senzun. Even the old ancestors in the Shentian sect who were in seclusion could not be compared to him. If the current sect leader saw the Shen Tian Celestial Venerable, he would have to kneel down and kowtow to him. That was the Shentian Senzun's seniority. When he heard the Shentian Saint Venerable call him Grandmaster, only then did the profound Heaven Celestial Venerable react. "Qin Yu is my disciple. He is hundreds or thousands of times more talented than all of you. Call me Martial Uncle from now on. If you still recognize me as your Grandmaster, listen to my orders from now on. Don't act on your own and cause trouble for me." His tone was full of disdain. Although he did not care about what happened back then, it did not mean that it did not happen. If he wanted to make a fuss, no one would be able to escape from his grasp. So what if they were both Senzun? Senzun and Senzun were worlds apart. He could even crush this new immortal venerable to death with a single finger. Qin Yu rejected Shentian Senzun's offer of protection. Falling into his battlefield, it was extremely difficult to find someone who could hurt him. No matter where he was, no matter what kind of existence he faced, he could easily escape unscathed. Why did he need Shentian Senzun's protection? If he could do it himself, he wouldn't need to borrow the help of others, nor would he need others to protect him. Shentian Senzun nodded in satisfaction. As expected of the disciple he was most proud of, he should have such confidence. So what if they were extremely powerful chaos demons? They could still be slapped to death with a single slap. If he couldn't kill him, then he would give him 2 slaps. If he couldn't kill him with 2 slaps, he could just stab him to death with a weapon. There was no need for so much nonsense. This was what he disliked the most about the Shentian sect. They respected the strong, but they always liked to scheme against each other. They always caused internal strife because of jealousy. However, if they were to face real danger, they would all want to find a scapegoat. If they did not even have the courage to face danger, how could they make a difference? They were all just cowards and idiots. After leaving this place, there were still many places that were affected by the disaster. Countless people fled in panic. In the end, they were forced into a corner by the chaos demons with no escape. When they closed their eyes and were ready to accept their fate, suddenly, a strong light shone on their eyelids. When they opened their eyes again, only the corpses of the chaos demons were left. Countless people looked around in confusion. He did not know which expert had saved all of them at the speed of lightning. No one knew who had saved them because the speed was simply too fast. They could only kneel with tears on their faces. They kowtowed until their heads bled to express their gratitude for escaping death. Qin Yu walked through one street after another. These people who were wreaking havoc everywhere were not very powerful. Wherever he went, the streets would be clean, and only the survivors would be left. Finally, he walked to the center of this abandoned city. It was a huge square, and the most powerful chaos demon was entrenched here. The chaos demon, who was nurturing even more powerful power, now had power that surpassed the holy ruler, but still could not compare to Senzun. It happened to be stuck at a critical point. This chaos demon's body was slightly gray, but it had the body of a dragon. As a holy ruler, it could break through the limit under the nourishment of flesh and blood and was about to break through to a higher realm. It was all because this lucky chaos demon had once obtained some dragon bloodline by accident. That 1 in 10,000 chance had fallen upon his head, and he had successfully fused with this trace of dragon bloodline. Then, it became a powerhouse with extremely high potential. The power of the bloodline was enough to support its continuous breakthrough. He had broken through the restrictions that every chaos demon had. The dragon bloodline, it's fate that we met, why don't you lend it to me? Qin Yu tapped the tip of his foot and left the ground, his body as light as a swallow. But since this chaos demon had such high potential, it was not easy to deal with. Although it had the body of a dragon, it was very cumbersome. It was more like the bite of a wild beast. But it was extremely powerful. Just one strike was enough to kill countless people. It swallowed all the flesh and blood on the ground and turned them into the power it needed. Lend it to you? Sure enough, everyone is greedy beyond measure. Why don't you lend me your body for a while? Such powerful power, such a perfect body, if I can eat you, my strength will definitely increase greatly. Qin Yu's eyes flashed with blood, accompanied by the sound of air breaking. The dragon-shaped chaos demon let out a shrill scream. How could you know my weakness? His weakness was not ordinary. The chaos demon had always been between his eyebrows, and his weakness was at his chin. Unlike the dragon clan's weakness, which was in the reverse scale and dragon horn. Unlike the ordinary chaos demon, whose weakness was between the eyebrows. Due to a very special reason, he was able to grow up safely until now. Even if he had the bloodline power that all chaos demons would be jealous of. Yet, he was still able to live to this day unscathed. Because every time he was severely injured, he could escape safely. Qin Yu exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Do you think I'm a fool? The dragon form was already special, so its weakness was naturally unusual. Chapter 952. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. In the blink of an eye, the two figures had fought countless times in the air. But in the end, the Chaos Demon was still at a disadvantage. The rolling divine lightning just happened to restrain him. It was a small ball of lightning that kept flashing. The Chaos Demon dodged quickly, but the lightning that had been hidden in the dark hit its weak point with great precision. This time, he couldn't hold on anymore. In the end, he fell heavily to the ground with heavy injuries. Hand over the dragon race's bloodline and give me that drop of essence blood. I can make it easier for you to die. Such an existence that couldn't be tolerated by heaven and earth, even if he wanted the Chaos Demon's essence blood, he wouldn't be tolerated. But he could give him a quick death. Now, he was on the verge of death. The Chaos Demon had no choice but to hand over his essence blood. But at the last moment, he suddenly went back on his word and wanted to completely destroy this drop of essence blood. The dragon soul immediately controlled time. Everything in front of him became extremely slow. Qin Yu directly absorbed the essence blood into his body. And the Chaos Demon in front of him had already turned into black fog and dissipated between heaven and earth. This kind of demon was not tolerated by the secular world, so naturally, it didn't have a body or a fixed shape. Now, his strength had broken through to the immortal level. But he knew that this wasn't the end. Since he had such a huge amount of resources, he definitely wouldn't mistreat himself. Using these resources, he raised his strength to the middle stage immortal level before slowly stopping. After that, he needed more time to increase his experience corresponding to his realm. Then, someone discovered something in shock. Everywhere Qin Yu went, all the places were cleaned up, not leaving a single one behind. It wasn't until later that someone finally found a pitiful remnant in several cities. But that was a very, very weak chaos demon. If it wasn't because it was extremely good at hiding and just happened to hide in a certain cellar, it wouldn't have been able to survive. Xuelan was both proud and worried. The two had been separated for a full 2 to 3 days. In these short 2 to 3 days, Qin Yu quickly cleaned up several cities. They used the fastest speed to clean up this chaotic area. Even with the combined speed of those sects and countless experts, they could only be on par with him. Such powerful speed and high efficiency attracted the attention of many people. However, no one would have thought that Qin Yu would be the Dragon Clan's expert that had appeared once before and made the entire immortal realm run in circles. Shentian Senzun, who had suddenly appeared and disappeared, returned to the Shentian sect. Sitting together with the current sect leader, they smiled and toasted each other as they drank the best spiritual tea. The atmosphere seemed to be very good, but if one looked closely, they would be able to see the fawning and fear in the eyes of the current sect leader. He didn't know much about the secrets of the past. But now, he discovered that the founder of the Profound Heaven sect, who had been missing for a long time, was also his great-great-great-grandmaster. His strength had already reached such a level. No one dared to guess his strength. They only knew that all the experts in the sect combined could not defeat one of Shentian Senzun's fingers. At such a powerful level, no one dared to provoke or question him. However, the previous Shentian sect had made a wrong decision. As a result, Shentian Senzun could personally destroy the sect that he had single-handedly raised at any time. If you have anything to say, you can say it directly. He really couldn't stand it if it continued like this. His mood was fluctuating, and he still didn't have an accurate answer. He also didn't know why this long-missing great-great-grandmaster had come. Was it for revenge, or for something else? Or was it to take back everything that he had in the past? He couldn't be sure. This was because secretly guessing the thoughts of an expert was a big taboo in the entire immortal world. Thinking of the past, as soon as Shentian Senzun said this, the current sect leader's heart was already in his mouth. He sneered and looked at him. Shentian Senzun was talking to himself. There was no need to bicker with such an ignorant little fellow. He didn't know anything, yet he could become the sect leader of the Shentian sect. He had indeed declined. If it was back then, he could only be a little boy sweeping in front of him. Back then, when I traveled the world, I also encountered countless rare treasures. I remember that the most unique one was the mud of all creation that had already gained sentience. It took me a lot of effort to get it. Then, he shut his mouth. He poured another cup of warm tea and drank it in one gulp. However, the current sect leader of the Divine Heaven sect couldn't control his excitement. Now, everyone knew that a great disaster was coming, but no one could take out the mud of all creation. Even if they had found some clues, where was the mud of all creation? No one knew where the mud of all creation, which should have existed in the immortal world, went. Although there were guesses that it might have been kept by some expert as his own collection. However, all the experts of the various factions said that they didn't have it. Because of this, there was even some internal strife that was neither too big nor too small. There were always people who felt that someone had hidden it, but in the end, they didn't find anything. Now, he finally knew which expert had captured it and kept it as his collection. It was no wonder that they couldn't find it anywhere. Before this, he didn't even know where this old ancestor went. If Shentian Senzun didn't return this time, then they would really be in trouble. No one knew where the rest of the mud of all creation was hidden. In short, they had almost turned the entire immortal world upside down, but they still couldn't find this crucial material. Good, good, good. This is really great. What's so great about it? I didn't say that I would give it to you. He had whetted everyone's appetite. However, Shentian Senzun wasn't prepared to give it away. If someone deducted a little from it, it would be enough to make it up to the heavens. But at that time, it would still be a waste of his item. Of course, it was impossible for him to offer up his belongings for no reason. It was impossible to give him a good reputation and send him away. If you want it, then give me something in exchange. The current sect leader slammed the table in anger. Then, his entire body went limp from exhaustion. What else could he do? He couldn't win in a fight. In terms of strength, one Shentian Senzun was enough to crush 10 of him. Are you so confident that the whole won't destroy the entire immortal world? Shentian Senzun stroked his long beard and smiled. With my disciple around, no matter how many chaos demons come, they will have to obediently lie down for me. Chapter 953. Translator, Translation Nation Editor. Translation Nation. A small lump of mud of all creation was just enough to mend the sky. No one could refute his words. Unless someone wanted to offend him in public. Although no one refuted him, there was a person who was good at controlling venomous snakes. He released a small snake the size of a finger. It carried a strong poison as it silently approached Qin Yu. Shoo. The small snake was cut into 2. It writhed on the ground as if it had died with its eyes wide open. A brightly colored body. Dark red blood flowed out of it. With a single glance, one could tell that this little snake must have carried a strong venom. Not to mention death upon contact, if this bite really landed on someone, not many people would be able to avoid it. At that time, no one knew if they would be seriously injured. Moreover, this little snake was too stealthy. Almost everyone was caught off guard. Using such a despicable method, I'll return it to you. If you let this snake bite you, we'll sever all ties. If you don't want to, then forget it. I'll make you pay the price. From then on, I won't rest until one of us is dead. Everyone wanted to laugh out loud, but everything proved to them that this was not a joke. Moreover, Qin Yu really did have the strength to do so. He was strong enough to say that he wouldn't rest until one of them was dead. The expression of the person who released the venomous snake instantly changed. The venom of this venomous snake was extremely strong. Even if it was him, if he was bitten by this venomous snake, he would definitely die if he didn't use a special method to control the wound. Therefore, he wouldn't agree to the first condition no matter what. Since he had to shed all pretenses, he didn't want to pretend anymore. Originally, he was both good and evil. He did things as he pleased. Even if he really started a massacre, as long as he was the final victor, he would have the right to speak. No one would choose to attack him. This was because the rules of the immortal world were like this. Only the strong would be respected. Whoever emerged as the victor would be able to make everyone believe in him. Countless venomous snakes crawled out of his wide robe. He had many bottles and jars on him. Although no one recognized them, they knew that they were all highly toxic. Moreover, no one doubted that as long as all of these poisons fell, this person was destined to either die or be heavily injured. Very few people were willing to offend such a master of poison. Because they were too difficult to deal with, they always had some special methods to save themselves from the fire and water. Not only could all kinds of poisons kill people, some could even turn a person's life around in a hopeless situation. Everyone's thoughts were all different. If Qin Yu were to die, it would be considered as good news to them. They would lose a powerful enemy, and the situation would return to how it was in the beginning. Now that the mud of all creation had appeared, the hole in the sky was no longer a threat to the world. When the time came, as long as they patched up the holes, the disaster brought by the Chaos Fiends would be cleared up by them sooner or later. Therefore, whether or not there was someone who could stand up and raise this flag to save the dawn of the world from this disaster did not seem so important anymore. I know this guy. People call him the Poison Sovereign. Don't tell me you're talking about the legendary #1 master of poison in the world. Hiss. It's said that countless people have died in his hands. He once single-handedly destroyed an entire sect. Looks like the situation is a little dangerous. Countless venomous snakes crawled on the ground at the same time, making fine and dense rustling sounds. It made one's scalp go numb, and they couldn't help but take 2 steps back. Qin Yu was in the middle of countless venomous snakes, surrounded by countless venomous creatures, but his expression did not change. Sometimes, a poisonous snake would jump up and try to bite him, but it would be mercilessly split into 2 halves from the middle. They couldn't even struggle. If they were cut in the middle, the snake's head might continue to bite. But if they were cut in the middle, they would become a pile of minced meat that couldn't move. In such a short time, the poison sovereign had lost many of his most beloved treasures. He couldn't help but beat his chest and stomp his feet. He had spent countless efforts to raise these treasures. So many of them had been killed just like that, and their corpses were even scattered all over the ground. I really hate you. So, you should die at the hands of my most beloved treasures. The colorless, transparent little snake slowly shuttled through the group of snakes. Because its entire body was transparent, no one could see where it was. Even if the poison sovereign had said it himself, no one could see where the treasures he had spent so much effort in raising were. Suddenly, a sense of danger flashed through his mind, as if something was about to threaten him. Qin Yu suddenly closed his eyes, relying only on his intuition. He accurately and steadily pried the little snake from its abdomen. The little snake kept twisting and struggling, but in the end, it could only softly turn into a corpse. This little snake was connected to the poison sovereign's mind. When the little snake died, the poison sovereign also spat out a mouthful of his heart's blood. I admit that your methods are not bad. Your poison skills can be said to be at the peak of perfection. It's a pity that you have never used these talents in the right way. You only have yourself to blame for today's outcome. When cutting weeds, one must dig up the roots. Qin Yu had already raised the sharp weapon in his hand. Before he died, the poison sovereign suddenly laughed maniacally. In the end, you will still be poisoned by me. I was born with a strange poison in my body. When I was young, I was captured by a so-called expert. He used my body as a foundation to inject 10,000 types of poison into me. In the end, he cultivated me into a monster covered in poison, but I didn't die. Not only did I not die, I even have the status I have today. I once swore that if anyone killed me, I would definitely make them suffer a heart-wrenching pain. Looking at his maniacal laughter, Qin Yu effortlessly pierced the blade of his saber into it. That maniacal laughter came to an abrupt end. Before you die, I will let you die with a clear understanding. The 10,000 types of poison in your body have no effect on me. I just happen to have an antidote for 10,000 types of poison. Now, I am safe and sound. The poison sovereign's laughter froze. This was already the last expression he had left in the world. The remaining people saw the tragic end of the provocateur. Even at the cost of his own life, he was unable to do anything to Qin Yu. All of them believed that they would never be able to avoid such insidious methods. And one after another, even if they could avoid one, it was impossible to avoid all of them. But Qin Yu was so strong that almost all of them were stunned. This kind of strength did not come from strength, but from other aspects. Chapter 954. With the passage of time, the dark hole in the sky seemed to have become a little bigger. Countless chaotic shadows rushed out of the void. But they had just landed and hadn't had the time to see this prosperous new world. They were all killed by one person. No one knew how many. From the very beginning, all the major forces had worked hard to eliminate them. But now, with the addition of one person, the situation was completely under control. As long as a chaotic demon appeared, they were all killed before anyone could react. Not even a corpse was left. It was so shocking and so easy. People couldn't help but wonder if the people sent before were too incompetent. Otherwise, why would such a simple matter be said to have the power to destroy the world? So it's that simple. Although it was a little dangerous, didn't it solve everything easily? Some people didn't care, while others fell into deep thought. Only those who were sent at the very beginning had nowhere to explain. It wasn't that no one had said that the reason they could win so easily and control the situation in such a short time was because one person had joined in. But who would believe it? There were so many places affected by the disaster on such a huge battlefield. Was it really possible to accomplish such a feat by relying on one person? Perhaps that person was indeed very powerful, but no one was willing to believe that this credit belonged to one person. After this credit was taken by countless people. Many people were pleased with the success because of this. This was because they had been promoted and even received a lot of resources as rewards. The current sect master of the Profound Heaven sect heard that the situation was under control. He was completely relieved. He was ready to have a good talk with his great-great-great ancestor. Now that the situation was under control, he had more time to have a good talk with the other party. He needed the mud of all creation very much. Even if the situation was under control, he had invested too many resources in it. For the entire immortal world, a day's delay was a loss. Originally, he was worried about his great-great-great ancestor who he had never met. But now that the jaguar had arrived, he naturally had no more worries. Are you sure that there isn't an extremely outstanding person who controlled the situation with his own strength? Is this credit really due to everyone's joint efforts? She thought of the bitter battle she had fought these days. She immediately nodded. Did you hear something? They said that all the credit belongs to one person, Izichan said. Is it because of his participation that we can control the situation? But I think that the juniors who were sent out earlier wanted to shirk their responsibilities, so they made up such an excuse. Such a huge crisis, if not for everyone's efforts, how could it be under control so quickly? Is it really possible to rely on one person's strength? His words directly brought this matter to the back of his mind. Moreover, because his tone was too firm, the current sect leader of the Profound Heaven sect gritted his teeth and made up his mind. Since the person he trusted the most had already said so. Naturally, he believed him. After all, he didn't think that a single person would be able to do much in such a big crisis. Perhaps in the history of the immortal world, there had been such a peerless talent. However, who knows how many tens of thousands of years have passed since such a genius appeared. When he found out about the confidence of the current sect master, Shen Tian Senzun immediately laughed. Since you think so, then there's no need for us to continue talking. If you really control it so well, then continue to control it. After saying that, he turned around and left. He even left the territory of the Profound Heaven sect. Originally, he still had some goodwill, even though he felt that these people were really insulting his name. However, it was still a sect that he had built single-handedly. Now, it seemed that things had changed with the passage of time, and he naturally didn't need any pity or charity. When they recognized reality again, they had to pay a bigger price to get what they wanted from him. Anyway, he had the good stuff in his hands, and the current situation wouldn't worsen in a short period of time no matter what. In just a few days, if they didn't recognize reality, the situation that was already under control would revert to its initial state of deterioration. But so what? He had already given them a chance, and they were just too arrogant. Shen Tian Senzun returned to the broken sky. Stop. They can't recognize reality, and they even falsely claimed your credit. Is it so easy to take advantage of my disciple? Qin Yu immediately stopped. In the past, he didn't care, but it didn't matter if he stopped. At most, after the situation worsened, he could just spend a few more days to fix everything. However, this might make things more troublesome. Very few people knew the reason why their progress had suddenly become much slower. Originally, the situation was under control, but the chaos demons came from all directions. After killing them here, a large group of them would appear from another place in a short while. Just like that, they couldn't kill them, and they would get tired. After that, batches of people were replaced, and they more or less suffered some injuries, and there was no way to control the situation. They were actually forced to retreat step by step. The chaos demons reclaimed a piece of the world that belonged to them. The situation was getting more and more dangerous. When it became more obvious, no one could hold on. After losing more than a dozen cities in succession, the leaders of the major forces had no choice but to gather together to discuss what caused such a big delay in the progress. Even the people who were originally invincible were defeated. Those geniuses who suddenly appeared to claim great credit had become existences that everyone wanted to beat up. Who asked them to be so cowardly when facing the chaos demons? The strength that they displayed was also not in line with the credit that they claimed. However, only one person could guess the reason for such a huge change in the situation. He had a very ridiculous guess in his heart, but he didn't dare to admit it. If all of this was really the result of his little great-great-grandmaster's efforts behind the scenes. However, he let his confidant claim the credit of his little great-great-grandmaster. And he even spoke rudely. Wouldn't that offend him completely? For a moment, his face turned green and white. In the end, he didn't think it through. I think I might know the reason. Under the pressure of so many people, the current sect master of the Shentian sect could only bite the bullet and explain the cause and effect. Chapter 955. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Xuantian sect had become the target of everyone's crusade. All the major forces wanted to find the legendary man who had helped them control the situation single-handedly. However, the situation was worsening and they could not find him at all. Xian Tian Celestial Venerable leisurely took out a fruit that made people salivate. This is a natural spiritual item, the emerald cloud fruit. Although it can nourish the body and improve one's talent, it's better than nothing for the two of you who have outstanding talents. However, the taste is not bad. It's one of the best among all the spiritual fruits. Take it and try it. Let's see what those people are going to do while we eat the fruit. Everyone who rejected him would definitely regret it. Of course, there was a chance that they would regret it and become angry. Now, it was time to see what kind of choice they were going to make. There was a living example right in front of them. At this moment, the situation was constantly deteriorating. They urgently needed an expert to control the situation. After searching for about a day, they still could not find him. All the major forces were ready to send out their own experts. They did not believe that someone who had not even reached the realm of a sage ruler could control the situation. If they sent out a few more sage rulers, they could achieve the same effect. With this thought, they did not continue to search. Instead, they sent out a powerful expert each. In the beginning, they did play a role and controlled the spread of the chaos demons. However, it did not take long before they could only maintain this state. It was a stalemate. It was almost impossible to take another step forward. Because there were too many chaos demons in the void. Even if they killed a batch, the next batch would appear very soon. Batch after batch, it was impossible to kill all of them. What kind of speed did that person use to kill all these guys? I seem to understand how he managed to control the situation single-handedly. As long as he kills fast enough and fewer chaos demons escape, it will be much easier for us to clean them up. But is it really possible for someone to be that fast? Now that the truth is right in front of us, we can only try and see if that mysterious expert can help us turn the situation around. It was natural for these experts to feel the pressure. That was because the huge hole in the sky had become a little bigger. Even more chaos fiends managed to escape. The speed and frequency of its appearance were much higher than before. Therefore, it was only natural that they couldn't control the situation. If he continued to waste time like this, step by step, then, not long after, everyone would face an even greater threat. The hole in the sky would continue to expand. If the black hole wasn't repaired in time, half of the sky of the immortal world might be in a state of collapse. By then, the endless amount of chaos fiends would truly be impossible to wipe out. As a result, it was getting more and more dangerous. As for those who personally experienced all of this, because they were in the situation, they didn't immediately notice this detail. Don't drag this out any longer. You've had enough fun. If you continue to drag this out, I'm afraid even more people will die and the area affected by the chaos demon will be even larger. Xian Tian Senzun could only throw the core aside helplessly. His disciple had already spoken. If he continued to sit on the sidelines and watch coldly, he would be somewhat unreasonable. Moreover, the situation was indeed worsening. It was time to resolve this matter as soon as possible. He could only take out the mud of creation that he had collected. The little fellow looked like a dirt ball as soon as it came out. It looked no different from ordinary sand on the ground. When this dirt ball came into contact with the outside air, it began to slowly melt. But just as the first grain of sand was about to land on the ground, Xian Tian Senzun casually caught it. The mud of creation in the immortal world had already developed its own consciousness. It was just that it was still somewhat ignorant. Its IQ was at most 3 years old. Now that it had done such a childish thing in front of everyone's eyes, it wanted to run. Take this thing and do whatever you want with it. Just a part of it can mend the sky. If anyone wants it, don't foolishly hand it over. Of course, Qin Yu knew that Shen Tian Senzun was only joking with him. Although his strength had reached Senzun's level, Shen Tian Senzun had never been a serious person. He did not have Shenren's indifferent and condescending attitude. Instead, he had his own tricks and laughter towards everything in the world. This was also the higher realm that Qin Yu was pursuing. Therefore, to stand shoulder to shoulder with the great Tao did not mean to become one with it. The self was a unique existence in this world. Nothing could erase his ego, let alone allow his ego to be mixed with anything else. This seemingly honest little ball of dirt was a divine artifact that had been condensed from all the living things in the 3 realms. They realized that they could not control the situation. The people of the various major factions began to have designs on the young great ancestor of Shen Tian sect. He even asked around and finally managed to find some traces of his whereabouts. It turned out that this young great ancestor was an extremely talented genius. Huarong, who was related to Qin Yu, had asked around many times. But Huarong clenched her teeth and refused to say anything. In the end, she had no choice but to say Qin Yu's name and appearance. However, no matter how much she asked, such as if someone could ask her about the male lead's weakness, she did not agree. He even directly blasted the person out, beating him into a half-dead state. If you want to use despicable methods, don't look for my Fire Chelin clan. We have always been open and above board. We have not formed any grudges with anyone. If you have bad intentions and want to extinguish the greatest hope of the current era, then you can go yourself. But before you go, you should consider the difference between you and him. Without seeing him in person, you will never know how powerful he is. Huarong threw everyone out with a bang. She locked the cave abode. Qi Yang was curious about what had happened. Thinking that Qin Yu was also her master, Huarong picked out a part and explained it clearly. Who knew that halfway through, Qi Yang was so angry that he wanted to catch all of them and bite them to death. Then, he felt a little proud. His taste was too good. Chapter 956. Qin Yu had long since tossed the little Fire Chelin to the back of his mind. It was just a slightly mischievous infant. Even though they were of different races, he didn't overlook how intimate the Chelin was with him. The little fellow was just a newborn. What could a child possibly do? His voice spread across half of the immortal realm. The mud of all creation is in my hands. If anyone is interested in trading, please come quickly. 2 sentences were enough to make all the important points clear. The most important thing to replenish the heavens was in his hands. Moreover, he needed resources and precious treasures to trade for it. He couldn't just give it away for free. Even so, he knew that there would inevitably be some people who would put on a sanctimonious expression and ask him to hand over the treasure in his hands. But so what? If there really was such an existence, he would just send them flying with a slap. Such arrogance would make them lose the right to trade with him. In the current immortal realm, he didn't fear anyone in terms of strength. Even if he took 10,000 steps back, the strength of his clone wasn't enough. Perhaps there was something else that forced him to face a large number of experts. Shen Tian Senzun wasn't far away. It would be easy for him to take their lives. The initiative for this trade was completely in his hands. He didn't give anyone the slightest chance to negotiate. He truly took out the mud of all creation in his hands. Many people with some ability had already seen that this was definitely a genuine treasure. Moreover, there wasn't the slightest bit of adulteration. The quality was unbelievably high. If they could have such a material, it would be much easier for them to replenish the heavens. If such a great contribution could fall into their hands, it would be for the best. Moreover, the mud of all creation could be used for more than just replenishing the heavens. If they could have it in their hands, the mud of all creation, which had already gained sentience, could be said to be inexhaustible. As long as they had enough resources and a suitable place to nourish it, they could give birth to a lot of mud of all creation. It would be enough for them to use and make even more things. When the time came, they would have countless innate spirit treasures. They would also be able to improve the quality of their natal weapons. Everything would be as easy as flipping a hand. Before anyone could say anything, Qin Yu's indifferent voice drifted over. However, everyone was able to hear it clearly. The highest bidder wins. Everyone immediately treated everyone around them as their enemy. Naturally, no one was willing to let go of such a good treasure. If he hadn't said those words earlier, they could have used some other methods to obtain the item. But now that it had been said that the highest bidder would win, if they didn't offer a high price, there would always be someone else who would be willing to pay a high price. While calculating what they could offer, they also looked warily at the unfamiliar and familiar faces around them. The atmosphere became quite heavy for a moment. Under the calm surface, countless undercurrents were surging. Some people had even begun to fight in the dark. But before anyone could offer a price or make their own calculations, Zhongxian's expression changed. The top sects, which had always been the most generous, did not hesitate to reveal their prices. It was a price of 10 million yuan. However, everyone knew that this was only the bottom line. Moreover, this time, only the crystal coins used for the exchange would be sold. They hadn't even taken out the treasures of their sects yet. That was the real highlight of the show. Therefore, more and more people gathered at the exit, and many people couldn't wait to join in the dispute. By the time they had the confidence to continue bidding, there were only a few forces left. At the very end, the price had reached the point where it couldn't go any higher. Looking at this piece of mud of all creation, many people showed a pained expression. Although this was a good treasure, they still needed to use many good treasures to exchange for it. The savings of their sects were almost all spent. However, there were still people who were willing to continue competing for it. Liu Shengbel, are you crazy? You actually took out the supreme treasure of your sect. This was already one of the treasures that the sect could take out. It was almost the treasure of the sect. Even such a thing could be taken out for exchange. Then, the bottom line in the hearts of the other people involuntarily decreased. Since things had already developed to this point, then if all of them increased the price by a little, they would also take out some rare treasures of their sects. It didn't seem to be something out of the ordinary. It wouldn't cause the price to soar to another level in an instant. I say, Johenian, don't continue to compete here. If this goes on, I'm afraid you'll have to pay for your coffin capital. How much better are you, Heiji? If you have the ability, don't continue to raise the price here. This time, I'm determined to win. Hurry, hurry, hurry. The current price has forced us to take out the majority of our sect's treasures. A few small sects had no choice but to withdraw. In the end, even a large number of sects had no choice but to withdraw. Because the price that was being shouted now was almost the entire wealth of some small sects. They couldn't match such a crazy price. Only some of the major forces with sufficient wealth would be able to compete for this treasure. A long white dragon with ice-blue patterns coiled together. A pair of bell-sized eyes stared straight at the mud of all creation. In the end, it shouted a price that made all the sects, large and small sects, unable to help but bitterly lament and have no choice but to give up. The dragon race had always liked to accumulate wealth. Therefore, every dragon race that had lived for tens of thousands of years could have a deeper foundation than a sect. Now, it had already been decided who would win. The mud of all creation aggrievedly shrunk itself into a small ball. An even smaller piece of soil fell from its body. This was a part of the essence of the mud of all creation. This small piece was just enough to mend the huge hole in the sky. No matter how frugal it would still be very little to no matter how much it saved up. The frost dragon was dumbfounded. Even the others were dumbfounded. They had originally thought that the mud of all creation was going to be auctioned this time. But now, it seemed that it was the mud of all creation. It really was the mud of all creation. It was as if it had been calculated, not more, not less. It was just enough to solve the current danger that they were all in. To mend the huge hole in the sky. It wasn't even a bit more. This is a bit unfair. How is it unfair? I only said that the highest bidder would get it. I only said that I wanted to sell the mud of all creation. Now, isn't this enough? Chapter 957. Now, no one dared to show the slightest bit of dissatisfaction. Qin Yu had a faint smile on his face. Suddenly, he lifted Ju Yu's cold corpse with his bare hands. He directly stabbed it into the ground, revealing the upper half of his body. His miserable appearance with blood flowing out of his 7 orifices was also displayed in front of everyone. Such a despicable person with evil intentions should be punished in such a way as an example to others. After he finished speaking, everyone present couldn't help but hold their breaths. No one dared to make a sound at this time. After being absent-minded for a long time, they gradually regained their senses. They were actually scared stiff. Everyone present had outstanding strength and status, but they were still scared and didn't show their might in time. Originally, they came this time for the mud of all creation. They also wanted to have a good talk with Qin Yu, who had the mud of all creation. With all of them together, could it be that they still couldn't persuade one person to stand on their side? But now, it seemed that all of their preparations had been ruined before they even started. Perhaps they had thought of the wrong method from the beginning, and also had some misconceptions about this person, thinking that he was just an ordinary person. Even if he was extremely strong and had outstanding talent, he was still in the category of ordinary people. But how was this an ordinary person? He was clearly a demon god. Moreover, he didn't care about feelings at all. If he said he would make a move, he would definitely take someone's life. All the major forces sent back the news they received. The Dragon Clan expert who obtained the mud of all creation could only helplessly send this small piece of mud of all creation back to his clan and use it to negotiate with other clans. After that, he won a lot of good reputation and also received a portion of compensation. But in the end, this was still much less than the portion they spent. In the end, the unlucky Dragon Clan could only receive some compensation from his clan. For a long time, he was even treated as a joke. All the major forces worked together. But now, they didn't have a single person who was absolutely powerful enough to gather all of them. How could they gather all of their strength? In addition, a few extremely precious materials were added to the sky curtain. If there is someone who has such powerful strength, to be able to gather our strength and control it completely, and use this powerful strength to accurately refine a few materials and carefully add them to the sky curtain after smelting them. I can only think of one person. The leaders of the various major forces could not help but look at the current sect leader of the Profound Heaven sect. There was also Senzun, who was forced to change his nickname. That was the original Shentian Sacred Master. However, after Shentian Senzun appeared, the Shentian Sacred Master became the Shentian Sacred Master. There was a conflict between their names, and as a junior, he had no choice but to change his name. Originally, his actions were already offensive. Now, he was only trying to set things right. But speaking of which, these things still made him an existence that people whispered about. How many years had it been since someone was forced to change their name after reaching the immortal venerable realm? No matter how powerful he was, there were still many people who would use this to talk about him, making this a stain that could not be erased in his life. Many people used their powers to catalyze their voices, asking Shentian Senzun to make a move. You want me to help you with such a small matter? You're really overestimating yourself. Shentian Senzun smiled and used his finger to enlighten Qin Yu. He then passed the method to mend the sky curtain to Qin Yu. Your strength is enough, Yi Futian said. It doesn't matter if this matter fails. I'll just stand here. At most, I'll help you clean it up. After saying that, he could not help but reveal a look of anticipation. Although he knew that the possibility of Qin Yu failing was very small, his disciple had been too perfect. However, this disciple of his had been too perfect since he was young. Especially in terms of strength, his speed of improvement was so fast that even he was a little stunned. Thus, no matter what he arranged, even if it was beyond the scope of what Qin Yu could accomplish with his current level, Qin Yu was still able to accomplish it with ease. In the end, he returned safely without a single injury. If there was a chance of failure, he would be happy instead. It would let him experience the feeling of a teacher for a day, a father for life. Qin Yu had already seen through everything, but he did not say anything. He had never failed before. In the end, everyone only knew that Shentian Senzun was still unwilling to come out. He only sent his disciple. Those who had coveted the mud of all creation all knew him and remembered his face deeply in their hearts. Xuelan assisted from the side. The Tao of the Great Oblivion that she cultivated was one of the most difficult great Taos to cultivate in this world. It was also the power closest to the origin of the great Tao. With her as the middleman, Qin Yu was able to circulate his power smoothly. He was able to smoothly complete this repair. Countless heads were moving about. Everyone raised their heads to look at the figure standing above them. The area in the middle was empty. Everyone stepped on their own positions and then simultaneously sent their power to the center. A bean-sized light suddenly appeared in the middle of the empty space. It contained an explosive power. In the end, it snowballed bigger and bigger. Strands of power leaked out, but as if they were being pulled by something, they all entered Qin Yu's limbs and bones. The explosive power on his skin almost caused his meridians to burst. But at this moment, a gentle and cold power dispelled all the irritation in this enormous power. Drops of sparkling sweat appeared on Xuelan's head. However, she was like a dewy snow lotus on an iceberg. She was even more elegant and beautiful. Compared to water hibiscus, she was much more proud and holy. Qin Yu was able to smoothly convert all of these energies into his own. Then, 3 materials appeared in his hand. In the end, the mud of all creation that he sold fell back into his hands. Several materials were burned by the divine flame formed by this enormous power. Impurities were removed bit by bit, turning into a flowing ball of water. It was transparent and colorless. But it could isolate everything. It was like, the sky was like a curtain. The translucent ball of water suddenly flew into the sky. Just as it approached the enormous hole, it quickly splashed in all directions like water droplets falling to the ground. It continuously spread and permeated the surroundings. In the end, only a little bit of the pitch-black hole was left. A huge eye appeared at the hole. Damn it, just a little bit more. Who repaired the passage that I worked so hard to open? This pair of eyes finally fell on Qin Yu. An extremely terrifying feeling pressed down. The neatly arranged crowd retreated one after another, leaving their original positions in an instant. Shentian Senzun suddenly appeared and pushed them back to their original positions. He solemnly watched that huge eye slowly disappear. The sky was finally repaired flawlessly, but that pair of eyes still left them with a trace of haze. Chapter 958. Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. The matter was settled. Many people were constantly scheming in their hearts, wanting to build a good relationship with this pair of master and disciple. Even if they could build a good relationship with the master and disciple, they did not dare to imagine how much they would be rewarded. Even if it was a small reward. The Shentian sect was in the most awkward position. After all, this was supposed to be their glory. However, because of their repeated mistakes, everyone had suffered so many losses. Now, the entire Shentian sect was going to become a joke. They were going to become a joke in the entire immortal world, not to mention trying to gain benefits from it. Even if they took the initiative to talk to them, they would not have the face to do so. Can you stop being so annoying? Do you want benefits? If you want to get anything from me, don't even think about it. If you want to get anything from my disciple, don't even think about it. Get rid of that thought. Qin Yu had already made preparations to leave this place. However, his face was too recognizable now. Many people were even proud to know him. There were also many legends about him being invincible that spread throughout the entire immortal world. Those who did not know him were probably those in the corners of the world. Those who knew him were all in disbelief. Heroes rise from humble beginnings. This had always been a joke in the entire immortal world. If one did not have a strong enough backer, no matter how talented one would die prematurely. However, thinking about it, Qin Yu, who had just arrived in the immortal world, was the one who did not put on airs. He did not have the arrogance of a special genius towards anyone. Even his own talent and strength did not match. Before Qin Yu decided to leave, he still returned to the place he had been to before and took a stroll around. With his current strength, it would take him at most 2 days to go through these places quickly. This was even after he took a break. In the Cloud Immortal City, a person was talking non-stop about how he met Qin Yu. At that time, an evil dragon appeared out of nowhere. With his strength that had just reached the heavenly immortal realm, he killed the evil dragon that was strong enough to devour immortal souls and was even comparable to an immortal spirit in one move. Lulu's tone was still as exaggerated and nonsensical as before. However, none of the audience showed any disdain at this moment. Instead, they listened with great interest. If it were anyone else, they would feel that it was too exaggerated. However, when it came to Qin Yu, he felt that it was only natural. Since she was able to fight against a sage king with the strength of an immortal. However, he was only fighting against a vicious dragon with the overall strength of a heaven immortal. Wouldn't it be extremely easy for him to kill it with a single strike? Therefore, everyone clapped their hands and cheered. In the dense crowd, only one person did not clap and cheer. Moreover, he even moved a small stool to sit comfortably. It's not as exaggerated as you say, but my master is indeed very powerful. Of course, Lan Feng did not succeed in becoming Qin Yu's disciple, but this did not prevent him from telling others that he was Qin Yu's disciple. Within a short period of time, Qin Yu's reputation spread far and wide. This self-proclaimed disciple of his was becoming more and more diligent. Initially, he had the strength of a heavenly immortal. But now, in just a short period of time, it seemed like he was about to reach the immortal soul stage. With such talent, he could be called a peerless genius. At least in this small Cloud Immortal City, he was already one of a kind and could stand at the top. However, compared to the master he had acknowledged, he was still a far cry. During this period of time, he had broken through a major realm and crossed 3 minor realms. However, Qin Yu was able to cross many barriers in a short period of time, barriers that others could not cross even after tens of thousands of years. In the end, he became a legendary person in the immortal realm who would be praised by anyone who heard of him. Xuelan looked at the red-haired and somewhat unruly youth in the crowd. His talent and bones are very good. If you take such a little fellow as your disciple, it would be good too. However, it was only good. At least in the eyes of most people, it could already be called outstanding talent. During this period of time, the speed of his breakthroughs became faster and faster. There were also many experts from various sects who wanted to take Lan Feng as their personal disciple. However, Lan Feng rejected all of them. He did not explicitly reject them. Instead, he used a pair of glowing eyes to look at those experts who wanted to take him as their disciple. Is your talent and strength comparable to Qin Yu's? I still want to wait for him to come back and be my master. He ran away before the ceremony was completed. One day, I will increase my strength and find him to be my master. Otherwise, it would be good to find someone who is more talented than him. Who knows, I might be able to increase my strength even faster. Everyone said that he was stupid. How could it be possible to be more talented than Qin Yu? Qin Yu was a legendary person who had not appeared in this world for countless years. This was not only reflected in the speed of his breakthroughs, nor was it reflected in his ability to challenge those of a higher realm. There was also his experience and the things he had done. He had saved the entire immortal realm. Who dared to say that he was not good? If anyone dared to say anything bad about him, they would have to consider their own sect's reputation. They would also have to think about the fate of the Poison Master. Now, the Xiantian sect had become a joke in the entire immortal realm. His talent is not bad, but his temper is a little too impetuous. When I return to the immortal realm, if he still maintains this speed of breakthroughs and does not forget his original intention, I can consider it. Forget it for now. Lan Feng was really a little smug. It was obviously an unreliable matter, but he said it as if it was really as he said. He was so arrogant and conceited. He was indeed not someone who could patiently increase his strength. He was a good seedling who traveled the world to increase his strength. Now that he was famous, if he took Lan Feng as his disciple, wouldn't it increase his prestige? When the time came, he would only be more overboard than now. So, any time was suitable. Even at a time like this, it was better to give him the cold shoulder. He wanted him to understand his identity and whether his lies would be exposed one day. What you said does make some sense. After all, it is not good to be so arrogant. Xuelan smiled and no longer cared about this matter. Then, they walked around the place again. They did not interact with any acquaintances and left directly. They passed by many places and saw the scenery of other states. Wherever they went, they would always be recognized by those who were strong enough. If they were weaker, they would not even be able to see his face clearly and would not be able to recognize them. Chapter 959. But for some reason, he couldn't find Light Shenron anywhere. He'd originally thought that the 9 origin dragons of this world were all in their own places, sleeping peacefully for a long time. So as long as he traveled the world, he would definitely find traces of them. Just like in the land of the extreme north previously, didn't he capture the traces of the Khan Water Divine Dragon? And that was the origin dragon of another divine realm. As the origin of the entire world, how could Light Shenron not exist? If he wasn't here, this world would slowly degenerate in the near future. So Shenron couldn't frequently leave the divine realm it guarded. Master, do you think there's some other hidden reason behind this? For example, Light Shenron's sudden disappearance was due to the shattering of the canopy. Although the matter was already in the past. But the sudden appearance of the enormous pupil at the end still made him feel uncomfortable. It was as if an extremely terrifying powerhouse strong enough to destroy the heavenly Tao had set its sights on the world of immortals. Shentian Senzun couldn't help but stroke the small tuft of beard on his chin. He fell into deep thought. If Light Shenron left for a long time, the entire world of immortals would be in danger of regressing or even being destroyed. But that was a long process. If he couldn't return in a short period of time, and if he couldn't return in a short period of time, then this would happen. In other words, if something really did happen, it was enough for him to bear such a risk, and he had to go. The divine light dragon would then leave its resting place. Perhaps there's still a terrifying threat in the world of immortals that we don't know about. After all, Light Shenron is the true guardian of this world. His departure could only be related to the world of immortals. Although they couldn't find him for now, they could just leave. Senzun was very interested in the Kanshue Shenron that Qin Yu had mentioned. How dare he make such a request to his disciple? How strong must he be to give him such confidence? He actually wanted Qin Yu to improve his strength before going to find him. But so what? Since he ran away again, then he'd give chase. Since he was already here. If he did not pay a price, it would instead be a waste of the keepsake that Kang Qing had guarded for generations. As for the dangers they might face in the immortal world, it had nothing to do with them. Since Guangming Shenron had gone to deal with it, there was no need for them to intervene at this time. If a huge disaster happened in one of the god realms, it would more or less affect the other god realms. At the very least, every origin dragon in the divine realm possessed such power. He could sense what was going on in the other divine realms. If they wanted to, they could even make all the changes in several god realms work together. However, this also meant that they were bound together for good or ill. At the very beginning, it was said that it was common. However, some things happened later on. Some of the 9 origin dragons split up, while others split up. As a result, they no longer affected each other. There was even a conflict between light and darkness. Wind and thunder even lived in seclusion. The 5 elements appeared, and the celestial realm reigned supreme. The dark world was a phenomenon that everyone despised. In the end, the changes became more and more obvious, and similar changes also became more and more obvious. This led to the final result. That was, the 9 divine realms did not interfere with each other and did not interfere with each other. They each did their own things, and in the end, there were obvious differences and changes. They came to the water realm of the 5 elements divine realm. There was a vast expanse of water here, but water droplets floated in the air. If one walked through these water droplets, it would be clean. Not only would one not get wet, but one could also, to a certain extent, summon these water droplets to do things for oneself. Even an ordinary person without any cultivation would be able to do this. This was the final change that occurred after countless tens of thousands of years of evolution. It was also the characteristic of the water realm. It's really magical. Xuelan tried to touch these water balls with her hand. She could clearly feel the fluctuations of the water. However, if she took her hand to the side, she could easily remove it without touching a single water droplet. It's just that there are water droplets all over the sky. How can we distinguish the direction and where should we go? Xiantian Senzun slightly squeezed his eyebrows and revealed a smile. A small palm-sized flag suddenly appeared in the middle of the sky. It floated above his palm. As he exerted a little force, the small flag began to shake non-stop. Not long after, a ball of light suddenly bloomed and scattered everywhere. Not long after, a fish ancestor with a huge tail appeared. Or a cultivator in cloth clothes. There were even a few fish scales on their faces. Other than that, they were no different from humans. The three of them had just arrived. Then, many small fries also arrived. They looked almost the same as them. Instead, the aura on their bodies was weaker. Their faces also tended to be ordinary. Greetings, Venerable One. The fish ancestor personally welcomes the arrival of the Venerable One. Greetings, Supreme Venerable One. 3 extremely powerful auras suddenly appeared. It caused all the large and small forces in the surroundings to be shocked. Feeling the surrounding vibrations, Xiantian Senzun's face, which was originally slightly better, immediately darkened. I summoned you here just to let you lead the way for my disciple. Who asked you to cause such a big commotion? Originally, it was just a low-key trip, but you had to make such a big scene. The 3 of them were originally overlords, but now, they were like children who had made a mistake. However, they were gnashing their teeth in their hearts. Originally, they had been taught a lesson a few days ago. Now that they were suddenly summoned, naturally, they did not dare to disobey. In order to show that they were already convinced and to avoid suffering some physical pain, they had already followed the biggest symptoms and specifications. Who knew that it was because they had caused too much of a commotion that they were disliked? Each of them was angry and nervous. This time, he would not use the previous method to block them in the cave abode and not let them out. Moreover, they would not be able to see anyone for many days. Even this time, they did not know how many treasures they had used to barely recover their appearance. In the end, Xiantian Senzun saw that most of the wounds on their faces and bodies had healed. He could not help but be a little surprised. I didn't expect you to have so many good things. In a short period of time, your wounds have mostly healed. Do I have to do it again because of this? The 3 of them felt uneasy. The bad premonition suddenly rose to the highest at that moment. Xiantian Senzun did not do anything to them. Chapter 960. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Disciple. What do you think of these people? Although they all look strange and not very pleasing to the eye, they can still be used as practice. If you let them practice with you, you can also take the opportunity to learn their secret skills. Qin Yu looked at these people seriously again. Among them, the strongest was the fish ancestor. He had a huge fish tail that was dozens of meters long. His body could be described as vigorous and healthy. His head was round, his eyes were small, and his facial features were small. He only had a mouth, and he could be considered handsome. His head looked like a fish's head. Next was the ordinary powerhouse in cotton clothes. Of course, he also had many forces under him. The subordinates who came with him were all wearing grey cotton clothes. They looked very low-key and were good at hiding. However, each of them was good. The remaining one was the one with some scales on his face. His bloodline was a little mixed and impure. Obviously, he was a hybrid of some race and another race. There were also some strange guys standing behind him. However, they had one thing in common with him, which was that their bloodlines were mixed and impure. Their strength could be considered good, but compared to the other 2, they were a little worse. What do you think? These people are pretty good for practice. Of course, that's all they have. If you think it's inappropriate, just tell them to get lost. Otherwise, keeping a group of people like Wu Yangyang by your side is simply a disaster. They can attract the attention of the entire water world at any time and place. Qin Yu nodded under the lizard gaze of the 3 people. Indeed, as Xiantian Senzun said, the appearance of these people would attract a lot of attention. However, if he could arrange it properly, not only could he avoid a series of troubles, but he could also keep a few people for practice. It could also be considered a good thing. Although he did not need so many people to practice now, he could use them to understand the world. It just so happened that he could find out the exact location of the peak of Nanshan Mountain. The three of them had some small forces and were also outstanding. After hearing the words Peak of Nanshan Mountain, they were slightly stunned. Then, they said that the so-called Peak of Nanshan Mountain was not in the south. Nanshan Mountain was just a name. In fact, it was in the center of the entire water world. There was a huge mountain called Nanshan Mountain there. Therefore, the Peak of Nanshan Mountain was very likely to refer to the Peak of Nanshan Mountain in the center. However, he did not ask these people, or he did not ask. After coming to the water world, he went directly to the southernmost point Nanshan Mountain. It was impossible to find the so-called Peak of Nanshan Mountain. The Kanshue divine dragon could be said to have a good plan. He wanted to play him in circles. However, all of this did not work. The so-called Peak of Nanshan Mountain was a legendary place. There were many stories there. It was said that many elders had come from the top of Nanshan Mountain, but not many people knew the specifics. Nevertheless, Nanshan Mountain was, that place, Nanshan Mountain as that was translation. Nanshan translation because that translation to translation there were Nananshan Shunron translation there. Without exception, those who wanted to go up the mountain were either captured or killed on the spot as people with bad intentions. If you want to go in, there is another way to avoid everyone and silently enter the interior. However, this method is a bit risky. The fish ancestor tentatively opened his mouth. Intuition told him that if he could do this, he might be able to get his freedom. Although he had indeed overestimated himself in the past and touched Shentian Senzun's things, he had already turned over a new leaf. Under the circumstances where he did not inquire clearly, he would never touch any powerhouse's things. Otherwise, he would not be able to bear the revenge of a powerhouse. Then, he told him the method he knew. This method was indeed risky, and it was not an ordinary danger. It was also a bad idea, but it was a very practical one. If one ignored the various dangers that might be encountered, the feasibility was very high. As long as they disguised themselves as guards, they would be able to enter the peak of Nanshan Mountain before anyone could react. In the end, it would be best to leave a few people behind to watch. They would be able to report in time before everyone sealed off the mountain. This way, they would be able to go in without bearing great danger. Although they might not be able to achieve their goal, they could still give it a try. It was just that how could they really sneak in and not be easily discovered? This became an extremely complicated matter. In the end, the three of them each made a promise. It was mainly because they sent their own people to sneak in, but they soon became hostile to each other. This was because they said it almost at the same time. Now, everyone could see that if this matter could be handled properly, it would be very difficult to deal with. Not only would their lives not be taken at any time, but they could also be completely free. None of them wanted to try Shentian Senzun's methods again. Otherwise, they might even lose their lives when the time came. Last time, they still had some things in their hands that could be used to exchange for their lives. This time, they did not even have any bargaining chips that they could take out. Not long after, several sets of clothes were placed in front of Qin Yu. These clothes were all uniform, and there were some things that looked like tags next to these clothes. The face of the linen-clothed man who arrived last was somewhat ashen. The fish ancestor had spent a lot of effort to get first place. It was almost the same as the other man with fish scales. Just a little bit more, just enough for him to get first place. He could not help but be a little frightened. If he had been just a little bit later, no one would have been able to tell who would have gotten first place. Are you satisfied with this? Damn it, just a little bit more. I'm clearly the one who is most prepared. Several powerhouses and big shots were fighting endlessly over this. Qin Yu was a little curious about what Shentian Senzun had done previously to make them work so hard. In order to achieve the goal of pleasing him, they would do anything. However, since they were unwilling, he did not want to keep these people. He could find a sparring partner wherever he went. To him, these people were nothing more than dispensable existences. Let them leave. Since they all want to leave, then just leave. Xiantian Senzun glanced at the three of them indifferently. He waved his hand and chased them away. Chapter 961. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. No one dared to say anything. They were all overjoyed. Could it be that they could finally leave this place? Then, they heard a voice behind them. It was like a death sentence. Although they already know where we are, it's better to make them disappear from this world in order to avoid revealing our whereabouts. If they go to other major forces for benefits, there will be some trouble. The three of them turned around without hesitation. Compared to freedom, their lives were more important. Moreover, the master and disciple would not stay in the water realm for long. As long as they were careful and did not reveal their whereabouts during this period of time, they would be safe. They would be able to survive until the end. As long as these two fiends, one big and one small, were sent away, their peaceful days would come back. They were all overlords of their own regions. When had they ever been so aggrieved? There was no one to reason with. Even in the water realm, Senzun was an extremely powerful existence. Moreover, the power that Xiantian Senzun had displayed was many times stronger than that of an ordinary prophet. Senzun was invincible in his realm. It was definitely not a joke. The Yu ancestor even took the initiative to bring them to his carriage and moved forward at the fastest speed. The other two did not fight for this job because their carriage was not as comfortable or spacious. Even though they were traveling at high speed, it still took them 2 to 3 days to reach their destination. In the center, there were indeed many big sects and forces. Moreover, there were also many experts. Among them, the Saint Kings would come out for a stroll. The Yu ancestor and the others had to keep a low profile, afraid that their goal would be exposed. One had to know that even the three of them were only Saint Kings at most. Saint Kings walking around meant that experts of Senzun's realm would also occasionally check in. Although the immortal realm was prosperous, the water realm was not bad either. What was different was that the water realm's patriarchs were not in seclusion and had sealed themselves off. They could come out at any time and display their strongest strength. The strongest and youngest of them all, Senzun of the water realm, had just broken through 100 years ago. As soon as he broke through, he attracted the attention of everyone in the water realm. Now, he wasn't in seclusion, just guarding the central plains. Such an expert could appear at any time, and might even capture them. You're keeping a low profile now? They're really a bunch of cowards. Xiantian Senzun had long expected such an outcome, so he was not surprised at all. No matter how low-key they were, this group of experts had swaggered through the streets. For the sake of speed, they didn't hide their tracks at all. As a result, many experts noticed the arrival of this group of people. So many experts have suddenly appeared. The fish ancestor, and even the other two have gathered here from all directions. What is the reason for this? Originally, the three of them were not in the same realm. Instead, they were scattered all around. But because of the Xiantian Senzun's order, they all gathered together, not daring to be the slightest bit negligent. In fact, in order to reach their destination in the shortest time possible, they had used a lot of treasures. That was the only way they could reach their destination in such a short time. This was almost all because they were too timid, so they subconsciously did such a wasteful thing. One had to know that the treasures they had used were all life-saving treasures that they had kept for many years. But now, they were used to travel. It was because they gathered quickly in such a short time and headed to the central plains together. They had arrived at the core region of the water realm. This attracted the attention of many people. No one knew why they had come. The various sects didn't discuss it, but they all tacitly sent some people to contact them. We've been walking for a long time now. Why don't we stop and rest here first? Anyway, we're not in a hurry. 1 or 2 days, right? Although they were a little anxious, they were more worried that they wouldn't settle down properly along the way. It wouldn't be good if they were disliked for not being a good host and even caused other trouble. Xiantian Senzun's method was not much different from Qin Yu's method. They both made them swear an oath. They were never to betray him, and they had to listen to his orders. But as long as Shentian Senzun was not in this divine realm, the power of the contract was negligible. So the three of them couldn't wait to let them go, and they didn't completely accept their fate. Because now, they still had some hope. After the master and disciple left, how could they return to their former carefree state? They found a place to settle down, but not long after, the guests suddenly scattered. The new guests who came later more or less had some unique aura on them. No matter how much effort they put in to hide it, there was no way to hide the special aura on them. They were all cultivators, and they weren't weak. From the looks of it, they were orthodox cultivators from various large sects. And there wasn't much malice on them. It was just that their acting was a little too bad, and people couldn't bear to look at them directly. The fish ancestor wanted to pretend that he didn't see it. Qin Yu only took a glance at them and remembered their auras. Only then did he continue to settle down. At their current strength, they didn't need to eat, but if there were high-quality spiritual wine and spiritual dishes, even if they ate some, it wouldn't cause any harm to their bodies. Instead, it could satisfy their appetite. If the materials were good enough, it could even increase their cultivation to a certain extent. It could be said that it was the first choice of many people. Now, what was in front of them was expensive spiritual wine and spiritual dishes, and all of them were made with high-quality materials and made by the best chefs. There was almost no waste of energy, and after eating, it would turn into a warm current of air that wandered in the body until it was completely absorbed. But the moment it entered the mouth, one could still taste an extremely fresh and delicious taste. Xuelan just took a small sip in a reserved manner. This was a snow vegetable unique to the entire world. There were crystal clear ice beads on it. The taste was crisp, and there was a hint of sweetness. She couldn't help but pick up some food with her chopsticks and put it on Qin Yu's plate. Try it, it tastes really good. Qin Yu looked at the lonely little dish in his bowl, smiled and tasted it, and couldn't help but nod. This scene was seen by all the people around, and they couldn't help but feel a little envious. Most of the cultivators were relatively indifferent. Otherwise, all kinds of selfish desires would expand infinitely, giving rise to many bigots. Chapter 962. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. However, it was rare to see such warmth between ordinary people. Even though they were all cultivators, they still yearned for such warmth. If they could have such a beautiful and considerate person by their side, they would be willing to give up even if they were given a bright future. Unfortunately, the beauty already had her heart. They could only look at them with envy. They looked at this couple who seemed to be made in heaven. Finally, someone couldn't help but stand up. He bowed courteously to them and saluted them. However, his eyes never left Xuelan. May I know this fairy's name? Such a beauty shouldn't be unknown. She should be known by everyone and admired by everyone in the world. The person who came was a rather handsome young man. He was waving a folding fan in his hand. A strand of hair fell from his forehead, making him look elegant and elegant. However, his eyes weren't clean and clear enough. They looked a little evil. Xuelan's clean and delicate eyebrows couldn't help but frown slightly. She stepped back politely to put some distance between them. You and I don't know each other. Please show some respect. If it weren't for the fact that they were in public. Xuelan even wanted to hit him directly. That person didn't step back. Instead, he advanced. His eyes were filled with obsession. Suddenly, a ray of silver light hit him. He could only let out a blood-curdling scream. His skin was bleeding profusely, and the blood was still seeping out of his body. His eyes had become empty. Qin Yu slowly put away the Chaos Dragon Spear under everyone's shocked gaze. I crippled your eyes because your gaze wasn't pure enough. It landed where it shouldn't have. Wasting your strength is a lesson to you for pushing your luck again and again. If anyone doesn't agree, you can come to me directly. That person was already the most powerful eldest senior brother among this group of people. Even eldest senior brother, who was the strongest among them, was no match for him. Even if the others were angry, they didn't dare to say anything. They didn't even dare to say that they were angry. They carried him away angrily. Before they left, they took a few deep looks. It was as if they wanted to remember the faces of this group. Only then did the crowd disperse. The owner of the tavern walked out and greeted them politely. However, he was already sweating profusely, revealing a bit of anxiety. Those few people are incredible. They are from Derivation Palace. Let's not talk about their strength, but I can see that your strength is not bad either. And they all have their own backgrounds and backers. Who knows how many things they have done that have angered the heavens and people, but none of them ended up well. Moreover, ordinary people like us have to rely on their protection to be able to survive in the central province. I don't think you're bad guys. You'd better leave quickly. As long as you leave Zhengzhou State, you can get good treatment wherever you go with your strength. The boss was just being kind, but of course, they wouldn't agree to it. This time, their goal was to get to the summit of Nanshan Mountain. If they left directly, where would they find an identical summit of Nanshan Mountain? Since he was from Derivation Palace, it was just nice. Because the Derivative Palace was guarding the top of Nanshan Mountain. Sooner or later, they would have to face these people. Now that they had dealt with them in advance, they knew what kind of people they were. Only by knowing yourself and the enemy could you win every battle. They bid farewell to this tavern in case it brought disaster to them. Since the plan to find a place to settle down and have a good rest had failed, they might as well go directly to the top of Nanshan Mountain. Xiantian Senzun was bored out of his wits at last, so he left first. No one knew what he had done. When he came back, he was full of pride, as if he had done something earth-shattering. Suddenly, a fire inexplicably broke out in Derivation Palace. Originally, the thing that they were least afraid of in the water realm was fire. As long as they casually summoned it, they could light up countless torrential rain or even a vast sea. No matter how powerful the flame was, it would be greatly suppressed in such an environment. But this flame was strange. It was faintly blue, and no matter how much water was poured on it, there was no way to have any effect. The fire was still burning. It didn't reduce a lot until the entire Derivation Palace was burned to pieces. In the end, almost all the strong people worked together to blow out these flames. Not only could the water not extinguish the flames, but it would also fuel the flames. This was the most bizarre thing in the world. Such a big thing couldn't be hidden at all. It didn't take long for everyone to know that Derivative Palace had been burned down. Moreover, it had been burned cleanly, leaving almost nothing behind. Master, after all, we still have to go to the top of Nanshan Mountain. There's no need to cause so many trivial things on the way. Looking at his master, his face was full of disapproval. Xian Tian Celestial Venerable chuckled. Those people only knew that a fire was set and burned a lot of things. But they didn't know that he had taken away a lot of treasures. He didn't care much about his disciples' words. As long as he had the power, he could do whatever he wanted. They weren't afraid of anyone in their group. Therefore, this could not be considered as a side issue. Only for the weak, these things could be called a new problem. Coincidentally, I think it's time for you to make a breakthrough in your strength. You can use them to practice. If it doesn't work, I'll find some inheritance for you directly. Maybe it can achieve the effect of enlightenment. If it still doesn't work, you can just pile up the treasures. There's enough of them. If it's really not enough, you can just go to those big forces and snatch some of them back. Qin, you didn't say anything more. Even if there were new problems, so what? If they had the power to solve all the problems, then the stumbling blocks would also become their whetstones. Even if it was a sharp knife, after the passage of time, it had to be honed with a whetstone often. Otherwise, it would be slow and not like before. What's more, it was not certain whether those people could find them or not. Now, everyone in Derivation Palace was too busy to take care of themselves. Even the protection of Nanshan Mountain had weakened a lot. Because they needed to draw all the people back. They had to rebuild the once majestic Derivation Palace. If they didn't have enough people, they couldn't do all this. Even the gate might not be rebuilt overnight. Everyone who came and went could only see the ruins of Derivation Palace. Chapter 963. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation clouds and mist lingered around. The teams from the various sects were uniform. Walking at the foot of Nanshan Mountain. A half-human half-fish powerhouse with a long tail had a flattering smile on his face. This is the famous Nanshan Mountain peak in the entire water realm. Since this was the core of the water realm, the surrounding water vapor was even thicker. Countless powerhouses stood in great numbers. At the foot of Nanshan Mountain, the surrounding lineup was extremely strict. There was almost no blank space left. Very few people knew why Nanshan Mountain was regarded as a holy land. Only those who reached the peak of Nanshan Mountain would know this secret. Suddenly, there were a few more people among the guards. Someone was interrogating and suddenly felt that something was not right. Why were there so many more people out of nowhere? Looking at the few new faces, Lin Yiqian smiled. Before they could make a sound of horror, they no longer had the chance to speak. Sure enough, it's more fun to kill all the way up. How long will it take to walk like this? Qin Yu casually summoned a dragon as his ride. Then, everyone immediately got up. In the blink of an eye, they crossed mountains and went around Nanshan Mountain a few times. They had already passed through layers of clouds and arrived at the real peak of Nanshan Mountain. Separated by a thin layer of clouds and mist, the rest of the people could not get close no matter how hard they tried. This was a normal thing, but even intruders could easily enter, which made them feel extremely awkward. No matter how exasperated the holy venerables were, they could not break this invisible barrier with brute force. Go and inform everyone. Someone broke into the Nanshan sacred ground. We must inform everyone in the major sects within this period of time. He was relatively powerful. He also had a certain right to speak. Therefore, he had heard of the existence at the peak of Nanshan Mountain. It was because he vaguely had a guess in his heart that he was so anxious. If such a big thing really happened while he was guarding, he could not escape responsibility. Even a holy king might not be able to withstand the anger of the most powerful existence in the world. Even if it was just casual and a little displeasure, Qin Yu was multitasking. His doppelganger and his original body moved at the same time, breaking through the clouds and mist. When they reached the peak of Nanshan Mountain, they saw a pool. From afar, the pool at the top of the mountain looked like the dragon transformation pool. It was as if there were countless dragon shadows surging within. However, if one looked carefully, they would not be able to see anything. He could only see the surface of the water like a bronze mirror. There were no ripples. As he slowly landed beside the pool, he noticed that there were no water droplets in the air. It was as if the water droplets unique to the water realm were isolated by the thin layer of clouds. The silhouettes of several people were clearly reflected in his mouth, without the slightest difference. Even a strand of hair that was drifting outside could be seen clearly under the illumination. If I hadn't fallen from the sky just now, it really would have looked like the sea. Xuelan's voice was crisp and clear. The boat was very far away. After a while, the echo came back. Although it was a little blurry, he could still hear it clearly. It really was her voice. The surroundings seemed to be very empty. It was almost empty. Xian Tian Senzun coldly snorted, pretentious. This 1-foot immortal silk is for you. You clearly knew that we were coming, but you didn't come out. Shenren's way of treating guests seems to be nothing more than this. However, since this is your own matter, I won't interfere. Qin Yu took the 1-foot soft and pure white silk. Although it looked extremely soft, it was difficult for swords and spears to penetrate. It was impervious to water and fire. It was a sharp weapon that could be used to attack and defend. However, now that it was in his hands, it had another wonderful use. The 1-foot white silk suddenly fell into the center of the lake and continued to flow. Qin Yu raised his hand and drew a circle. This 1-foot white silk suddenly spun in the center of the water. First, it brought about a small whirlpool. Then, the whirlpool became bigger and bigger. In the end, a huge waterspout suddenly rose from the ground. The water in the entire lake seemed to be sucked dry. The water level dropped and all of it surged up, creating a huge whirlpool in the air. It kept rolling and even went straight into the clouds. Kanshui Shenron, who had been hiding at the bottom of the lake, had to come out. If he didn't come out, the top of Nanshan Mountain where he lived would probably be completely destroyed by this huge waterspout. The so-called top of Nanshan Mountain was a unique space that he had opened up. The Nanshan Mountain in Zhongzhou of the Water Realm was one of the entrances to the top of Nanshan Mountain. However, only those with a special bloodline and powerful strength could have the qualifications to enter the top of Nanshan Mountain. Originally, when he said those words and asked Qin Yu to come to the top of Nanshan Mountain to find him, it was just a joke. He didn't think that he would really be found. But now, was there no way to escape the fate that had been set in stone? Originally, he already had a premonition in his heart, but this premonition came true. It made him very unhappy. Qin Yu saw him come out, but he had no intention of stopping. He continued to make this huge waterspout continue to rise. The water in the lake had been completely drained, revealing a piece of azure crystal at the bottom of the lake. Kanshui Shenron finally couldn't stand it and spat out a mouthful of dragon's breath. It was invisible and colorless, as if someone had pressed the pause button from afar and controlled the time of the entire space and time. Kanshui Shenron wasn't good at controlling time and space. It was an extremely special ability, and only those with special talent could have such power. However, as long as one's strength was strong enough to stand shoulder to shoulder with the entire Great Path, one would have such powerful strength. With a raise of one's hand, one could affect time and space, and even time. However, something that shocked him happened. In just a short moment. Thus, Qin Yu was able to move around with ease. Even the people around him were gradually relieved of this influence. Although the waterspout gradually subsided after this incident, all the water in the lake returned to its original position quietly. This made Kanshui Shenron believe that there must be someone among them who was good at controlling time and might even have an extremely special talent. As long as one could have the ability to control and change time without being absolutely powerful, one's future would be limitless. Compared with the most basic 9 elements in this world, time and space were the most mysterious existences. If one could completely control them, they could even become the god of creation. Even at his level, he was eager to go further and open up his own divine realm. Instead of being the so-called origin dragon, it was better to be the original god of creation. If Shenron wanted to go further, this was a step they had to take. Chapter 964. However, it was too difficult to take this step. Even someone as noble as Shenron could not help but feel greedy. This energy fluctuation, it's him. Dragon souls only had one master, and they only obeyed their master's orders. Whether it was Shenron or not, it was all the same to him. He was just an insignificant stranger. What? Do you want to have this kind of power too? But this is a unique talent of dragon souls. So I'm destined to disappoint you. What you want will never be yours. I'm here to make you fulfill your promise. I let you run away last time. Let's see where you can run to this time. Kanshui Shenron's expression turned slightly ugly. His beard on both sides trembled slightly, showing that he was not in a good mood. Indeed, he had such thoughts, but he was still displeased that someone had said it so bluntly. If not for the fact that it was too difficult to find a way to control the power of time in this world, he would not have suddenly had such thoughts. However, it was impossible for him to hand over his essence blood and fulfill his promise. It was linked to his strength. If he handed it over, his strength would be greatly reduced. Unless it was absolutely necessary, no dragon would hand over their essence blood so easily. PH, leave this place first. Let's see how you're going to ask for my essence blood if you can't even find me. Suddenly, Shenron's figure disappeared without a trace. All that could be seen was yellow sand. There was not a single trace of water left. Not only that, but all that could be seen was a stretch of dry land. Not even a single green plant could be seen. It was as if this was a land of the dead. There was no one else here except for himself. Everyone was separated from each other. No matter where he went, he could only see himself. Qin Yu took 2 steps in his original location. Suddenly, he appeared at another location. The place where he had been standing suddenly caved in, and a deep pit appeared. The bottom of the pit was densely packed with sharp weapons. Countless spikes flickered with a sharp light. One could imagine that if he had not dodged in time, he would have been pierced into a sieve. There were indeed many such methods, but it also made him understand that all of this was merely an illusion. However, the illusion created by Shenron was also very real. In the past, he had only seen such a realistic illusion from One-Eyed. One-Eyed was suddenly released, and as soon as he appeared, he began to look around. Its huge eyes blinked. The scenery here is not bad, and there is also a very beautiful lake. But why are you walking outside? I don't see anything over there. He was born with the ability to see through all fabrications. In his eyes, everything would return to its original appearance. If he couldn't control it, he wouldn't be able to see the illusions created by others. Qin Yu seemed to have sensed something and suddenly continued to walk forward. This time, he didn't dodge immediately when he was in danger. Instead, he allowed a hammer to fall from the sky and land on his body. However, he had already determined that everything in front of him was an illusion. As a result, the sledgehammer didn't cause any harm to him after landing on his body. In the blink of an eye, a hole appeared in the illusion. There was no need for One-Eyed to say anything. He directly saw everything, the most original and most realistic appearance. However, it didn't take long for him to be pulled into another illusion again. However, at that moment, he also saw the state of the others. One by one, they were either dignified or panicked. Shentian Senzun was completely enjoying the show. He obviously had the ability to get rid of this illusion, but he didn't. Shualan had been extremely calm. She must have guessed that everything in front of her was just an illusion. Although it was possible that the injuries she encountered in the illusion were real, she was still able to handle it with ease. As for how the others were, he didn't have much to do with it. Seeing that there were no wounds on his body, he focused on repeating the illusion over and over again. Originally, he had the strength to completely break through this illusion, but he wasn't in a hurry to get rid of it. Instead, he used his heart to perceive the path in front of him through the restrictions of the illusion. He closed his eyes and ignored everything around him, even the sound of the wind, even the sound of footsteps. Even if there were all kinds of subtle sounds, none of them could become factors that affected his judgment. He would go wherever he thought was the right path. Whether or not he felt a sense of crisis, whether or not he heard a familiar voice calling in his ear, he unswervingly walked forward step by step according to his own thoughts. Until his eyes opened up and there was a strong light. A cool breeze fell on his body. The sound of something breaking through the air came from behind Qin Yu. Judging from the sound, he was almost certain that this attack was aimed directly at his back. If it succeeded, it could directly dig out his heart. No matter how powerful a person was, losing his heart would cause serious injuries and be on the verge of death. If there was no good spirit treasure to save life, it might not even be long before he died because of his injuries. No matter when, that was one of the most important points of life. This time, he didn't stand in the same place. He just slowly turned around and faced the attack. Kanshue Shenron thought that he was going to succeed. But in the next moment, he saw that the foot-long white silk suddenly became extremely tough. It directly attacked from the side of his body. He was tied up like a dumpling, with only his head and tail exposed. The small foot-long white silk grew with the wind. However, it was still extremely difficult to tie up such a huge body. But it was difficult to break free no matter what. It would take Shenron a lot of effort to destroy this foot-long white silk. This is actually the best snow silk of the sky silkworm, and the sky silkworm has the strength of a holy king or even higher. But if he wanted to get this foot-long snow silk of the sky silkworm, for the sky silkworms, it was like taking away the blood essence of the dragon, which would cause great damage to them. So generally speaking, this kind of thing was extremely rare, unless he could crush it with strength. He had no choice but to do so. But this foot-long snow silk of the sky silkworm happened to be white silk. The quality was high, and there was no trace of unwillingness to cut corners. So much so that he was tied up tightly and couldn't break free. Qin Yu didn't care about his struggle. When the white silk was wrapped up, the final result was already decided. But Kanshue Shenron still insisted on his own opinion. It was impossible to make him submit. He was the origin dragon, and he would never submit to anyone. Even if he had fallen to such a point. To the extent that he couldn't break free, he would never easily hand over his blood essence. Chapter 965. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The first source Shenron blood essence. As he moved the boiling water with his mind, the foot-long white silk around Shenron's body tightened. It was so tight that even Shenron could not bear it. But this was still tolerable for him. So he still gritted his teeth and was unwilling to take out the blood essence. He did not know what he would face in the future. Give him some time. He would definitely be able to break through the restraints of this white silk. You said that I was not strong enough at that time. But my current strength should be able to meet the standard. You said that I had to go through various trials. But now that I have passed the heartbreak trial, you are not prepared to keep your promise. If there is really a heavenly Tao in this world, you should be punished. Kanshue Shenron suddenly laughed out loud. How could there be so many heavenly Tao in this world? How could there be so much karma? Since it was the origin dragon, it was naturally the most powerful existence. Perhaps the rules of this world were indeed very strict. But for him, there were still many loopholes that he could take advantage of. Anyway, he did not say that he would not give it. It was just an excuse. But for him, as long as there was an excuse, it would not be considered a breach of contract. So what if he was not convinced? In the end, he was stronger, so he had more right to speak. So this is the so-called fairness. All of a sudden, Qin Yu aimed at the reverse scale and thrust his blade down. Since he was unwilling to take it out, he would take it himself. Kanshue Shenron was unwilling to take out the blood essence that he had originally agreed on. Then he would take it out himself. Although it was relatively more troublesome, he could not return empty-handed. He had to fulfill his promise. If he was unwilling to fulfill his promise, if the heavenly Tao was biased towards the strong, then he would seek justice for himself. Kanshue Shenron kept struggling. He finally felt a fatal threat. He said that he would use this method to forcefully extract his blood essence. In the end, he would only be seriously injured. At that time, he would have to pay a greater price than before. So he used all his strength. Even if he was injured, he had to break free. The difference in realm allowed him to succeed. In the case of such a huge difference in realm, even the best talent could only play a small role. But just as he was about to break free and dodge, Shentian Senzun suddenly controlled him. He reached out and controlled it from afar, causing the foot-long white silk to tighten even more. The dignified dragon god was incomparably noble, yet he was tied up like a worm. Of course, it was impossible to escape. Just hand it over. Otherwise, I don't recommend using more forceful means. Kanshue Shenron struggled for a while, but he couldn't break free. This was unlike before, when he clearly knew that he would only be trapped for a short period of time. As time passed, he would be able to escape unscathed. But now, he could clearly feel it. If he couldn't escape in time, he would definitely take away the most important blood essence. In the end, he shouted loudly, and his voice spread far and wide. Countless echoes came from all directions. Stop. I will fulfill my promise myself. But now, he only hated himself for not using a more cruel method. Instead, he had only used an illusion. In the illusory realm, if one thought that they were injured, then they were really injured. If one thought that they were dead, then they were really dead. But it was still too easy. He should have directly killed or injured him. That way, he wouldn't have to pay such a big price. He even had to bear such a great humiliation. But now, if he didn't compromise and agree, only death would await him. Kanshue Shenron was still not released. He could only force out a drop of blood essence. Qin Yu put it away and didn't immediately call him. Instead, he asked him again if he was willing to submit. Don't push your luck. I'm willing to agree only because of you. There's also a casual oath between us. It's because at my current level, a casual sentence can be witnessed by heaven and earth. But if you want me to submit to you, what will you use to persuade me? Qin Yu looked at the white silk wrapped around his body with a faint smile. Since he had been reduced to a prisoner, he had no right to continue negotiating. Kanshue Shenron could only choose to submit. Right now, he didn't have the ability to directly control Shenron's life and death. But if he was trapped like this for a long time. However, It was not impossible to do so. In the end, there was no other way. He had already given up his blood essence. If he refused at this time, he didn't know what would be waiting for him. But his intuition told him that if he didn't agree this time, what would be waiting for him might not see the light of day for a long time. So he gritted his teeth and agreed. But he still didn't have any good expression. He was willing to agree because he had no choice but to make the decision. Because of the difference in level, the contract signed was a relatively equal treaty. This was not unacceptable for Kanshui Shenron, so he breathed a sigh of relief. Qin Yu's strength broke through to the Holy King realm naturally. Such a huge amount of power poured into his body, but it was all converted and absorbed by him. There was also a trace of power that was wasted. This trace of powerful power not only increased his strength, but also transformed his body. Now, every bone, every drop of flesh and blood had unparalleled power. Kanshui Shenron understood a little. So this is what you're doing. The cultivation method you're cultivating is a little special. I keep feeling that it's very familiar, but where have I seen it before? He couldn't remember, and then he stopped thinking about it. Maybe it was something unimportant that he couldn't remember. But he vaguely felt that this was a very, very important thing that he couldn't remember. If he couldn't remember it, he was afraid that he would miss something. But no matter how he thought about it, he couldn't remember who he had seen before who had such a special cultivation method. Using such a strong method to take away every drop of blood essence of a powerful dragon. With the contract, as the master, Qin Yu could see through every thought in Kanshui Shenron's mind. He couldn't help but have some doubts. Was there a problem with Kanshui Shenron's memory? But if there was a problem with such a powerful Shenron, who had the strength to tamper with it? Were there any more powerful existences above the 9 elemental dragons? Perhaps there was no limit to the climb of strength. Every time you defeated a seemingly invincible existence, you would find a more powerful existence waiting for you to challenge and defeat. Chapter 966. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Countless people gathered at the foot of Nanshan Mountain. It was a sea of people. However, no one dared to act rashly. Instead, they raised their heads and looked at the towering mountain peak surrounded by clouds. No one had ever reached the peak of the mountain. However, the powerful intruder had broken into the peak of Nanshan Mountain before everyone could react. He had not returned yet. This was not good news for them. If no one came back, no one would know what had happened up there. That was the Nanshan sacred land. What the hell is going on? It's been a really eventful period recently. So many big disturbances have happened one after another. Derivative Palace has been burned down. Let's not talk about it for now. Now, the Nanshan sacred land has been broken into. What's more, none of you have found a way to go up the mountain. The Derivative Palace Master was furious. Even though he could barely maintain his demeanor as the Palace Master, everyone could see that his emotions were on the verge of exploding. If anyone added fuel to the fire, he would immediately fly into a rage. However, no matter how furious he was, no one could send people to the Nanshan sacred land and to the real peak of the mountain. There were traces of Shenron and supreme inheritance there. Everyone who had been there had a different definition of that place. However, there was one thing that was the most similar. That was, everyone who had been to the peak of the mountain regarded it as a unique sacred land. Some people had obtained supreme treasures from there. Some people had obtained supreme and glorious inheritance from there. As for some people, when they went in, they were trash whose meridians had been severed. When they came out again, they had become an absolute powerhouse. However, it was just an accident that they could go to the peak of Nanshan Mountain. Kanshui Shenron could see the people at the foot of the mountain through a layer of clouds. Sometimes, I'm too bored, so I take a nap occasionally. This is the time when the cloud barrier is the weakest. There will always be some people who break in. Since they came, it's fate. So, I just gave them something and let them go. In the beginning, he didn't think that his casual action would actually bring him such a great help. In fact, it was very appropriate to call it troublesome. Originally, no one knew that he was resting at the top of Nanshan Mountain, and it was an absolutely safe place. However, It was because of these people who acted on their own initiative that this place became the center of attention of the world. However, great concealment had given him another layer of concealment. For example, when he received the token and was asked where he lived, he said that he lived at the peak of Nanshan Mountain in the water realm. This could not be considered a lie, nor could it be considered as misleading. After all, what he said was true. But generally speaking, no one would think that he lived in such a noisy place. Previously, he had just casually mentioned it out of habit. There were times when Shenron was unreliable. He didn't seem to have much emotion. However, in terms of selfish desires, he was much crueler than anyone else. Because they didn't care about anything. Even if he knew what the consequences would be if he misled others, he did not care. In the future, Shenron in the water realm will disappear. Kanshue Shenron's expression changed. In the end, he thought that now that he had signed a contract, he had to listen to orders. Although it was an equal contract, he still had to be subject to many restrictions. It was just some things that he could do that were not too excessive. He had to agree. It was just that he did not appear in front of others. It was not an excessive request. As Shenron, he should not appear in front of the public. Even if you disappear, you have to let me explain what happened after my death. If I disappear without saying a word, it will only cause panic. After all, I am Shenron, who protects the entire water realm. Kanshue Shenron's tone was unusually tough. However, Qin Yu still did not care. Even though the origin dragon had suddenly disappeared without a trace in the divine realm, countless people were still trying to find an answer for it. Even if they did not know whether the answer was true or not, it did not prevent them from finding reasons for themselves. Even if it really disappeared suddenly, as long as there was no great disaster in the water realm that could not be overcome, no one would think of Shenron. It was obvious just by looking at the divine realm. When such a big thing happened in the past, no one had any ideas about Shenron. But as long as Shenron did not appear, it often meant that there was still room for maneuvering. No one would wonder if Shenlong was no longer around, or if Shenlong had been defeated by someone. Could it be that the dragon god had already fallen and was no longer in this world? Because that was just nonsense to everyone. The weak would never be able to imagine that the strong, whom they could not defeat, would not be defeated by others. A terrifying existence that had existed for a long time would suddenly fall because of some accident. There were so many people at the foot of the mountain. In the end, they still had to leave under their noses. It should be fine. It should be fine. If there is really some terrifying existence in there, and it bestows opportunities to those who are fated, then it must be an extremely terrifying and powerful existence. How could it be by just a few? Look at what that is. The original topic was interrupted. In everyone's eyes, there was only that holy and majestic existence. Such a powerful existence had suddenly appeared. Everyone finally understood why Nanshan had always been regarded as a holy land. It was not only because of the uniqueness of this place, but also because of the existence of this absolute powerhouse. Many people had not obtained any opportunities from there, nor were they the confidants of the major forces. So they did not know about this matter. But now they knew. There was indeed a powerhouse in the Holy Land, and it was an existence that no one could defeat. And it might bring them a peerless opportunity, allowing them to benefit a lot from it. Kanshue Shenron did not care about these crazy people below. Instead, he endured the humiliation and quickly wanted to leave this place. At this time, this kind of people suddenly realized that there were still a few people standing on this powerhouse's body. Yu Zhu and the other two could not wait to make their presence a little weaker, a little weaker. The strength of the few of them could be considered to be extremely powerful, but they still became the target of public criticism. This was especially true for the divine dragon who had given birth to such a huge creature. She had vented all her anger on them. Because except for them, Shenron could not provoke anyone else. Thinking about it, their mood seemed to be a lot better. No matter how powerful they would still be slaves and servants, and they would have the same status as them. Chapter 967. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. There are people on Shenron's back, and there's more than one. Kanshue Shenron was furious, but he had to leave as quickly as possible. But even if they were merged together, the moment he appeared just now was still clearly seen by everyone. Some even recorded the scene and watched it over and over again. In the end, they confirmed the people standing on Shenron's back. They were the people who had barged in earlier and were called thieves by them. Because they were heavily guarded, they actually blocked Shenron's friends outside. They even caused such a big commotion. If they were to be dealt with later, no one would have the ability to withstand it. Therefore, soon after, many people wanted to find Shenron and Shenron's friends. They also said that they were willing to apologize with countless treasures. Unfortunately, no one appeared in the end. Even after Shenron disappeared from Nanshan, no one could find a trace of Shenron anywhere else. Disciple, this little pet of yours is a little disobedient. Do you want me to help you train it? I promise that when I return it to you, it will be an obedient little snake. Kanxue Shenron glared at Shen Tian Shenzun. Although there was a contract restriction, he couldn't do anything to Qin Yu. However, he could still open his mouth to Shen Tian Shenzun. He spoke rudely. What a big tone. It's a pity that I didn't contract with you. I am Shenron. How noble am I? I will never be like a little snake, wagging its tail and begging for mercy. That's just a dark creature living underground. How can it be compared to me? Shen Tian Shenzun laughed. He had such a big tone. Although the divine dragon was indeed incomparably honorable, the present was different from the past. As a master, he asked his disciple for Shenron, and it wasn't like he was asking for it. Why couldn't he do it? Qin Yu didn't have any objections. He also didn't respond to their conversation. Kanxue Shenron had tried to set him up time and time again, trying to deny it. If he kept Kanxue Shenron with such a character by his side, unless they didn't want him to come out, something would definitely happen in the long run. Do you want to think about it? I guarantee that I'll train him until he's obedient and won't dare to have any other thoughts. The pride on Kanxue Shenron's face suddenly froze. He actually heard the sound of him being casually sent out. It wasn't that he was casually sent away, but that his personality was truly too unpredictable. In the long run, it would also be a hidden danger. Handing it over to Shentian Shenzun would not really do anything to him. Even if that was the case, as long as there were emotions, there would be a distance between them. So what if she really gave him away? Someone in Central Continent's crowd suddenly raised his head, giving that recorded video another look, continuously flipping through and selling it. After rummaging through the room, he found Qin Yu. That person suddenly smiled, his features picturesque. It was just that there was too much haze in his eyes, and it was easy to make people unhappy. Finally, he found him again. He didn't know whether it should be called fate or not. But this time, it was he who found Qin Yu first. The initiative was in his hand. Kanxue Shenron suddenly had a vague feeling that it seemed to have something to do with his new master. Originally, at his level, he would have a vague feeling. This feeling was sometimes very accurate, but sometimes it was not so accurate. After all, it was changing in real time, and no one could accurately predict the future. Someone has their eyes on you. Have you offended anyone before? I feel that although that person's strength is not very strong, he seems to have some relationship with you. Maybe I'm wrong. Speaking of the people he had offended, adding up the corpses, they could pile up several South Mountains. Those who had offended him were basically all dead. Even if they didn't die, they were basically living a life worse than death. But in this water realm, he really couldn't think of who it was. Could it be that they came from the immortal realm? If they dare to come, I'll kill them without mercy. As the saying goes, counter soldiers with arms, water with an earth weir. Don't tell me I have to be in fear all day because of your words and wait for that person to come. No one in this world has the qualifications to make me wait for him. Xuelan blinked her beautiful eyes. Suddenly, she blushed and her heart beat faster. But she hid it very well. After all, she restrained her emotions, and in front of outsiders, she looked even more like an iceberg snow lotus. She was not good at expressing her emotions to outsiders. Even if she suddenly had some strange feelings in her heart, she would not show it directly. In a panic, she hurriedly hid it. Shentian Shenzun, who was at the side, suddenly had a thought and directly pulled the others away. If this matter really came to fruition, his disciple was going to have a serious wife. In all fairness, Xuelan was top-notch in terms of appearance and talent. There was nothing that wasn't perfect. Speaking of which, it was not very good. She didn't do it perfectly. She was too pure when it came to relationships. And she didn't understand the ways of the world at all. In the entire world, Qin Yu was the only one who could make her feel normal emotions, and even love. There was no one else around them. There was no one around. Only the two of them were alone. Xuelan couldn't recognize the emotions in her heart. She restrained herself and moved a little closer. She closed the distance. She was so close that she could feel the other party's breathing. Qin Yu smiled slightly. "Why don't you sit closer? There's no need to be so much distance between you and me." After saying that, he reached out and pulled her into his arms. The huge Shenron was still shuttling through the sky. The sky was slightly dim. It revealed a deep, dark purple color. There was no starry sky. But there were countless light segments like colorful ribbons. The two of them were side by side, looking at the beautiful sky, until their figures were getting farther and farther away. Shentian Senzun stroked his small tuft of beard with some relief. It seemed that this was going well. The two of them were usually cold and unapproachable. Originally, he was worried that they wouldn't know how to get along after getting together. Now it seemed that he, as the master, was thinking too much. The relationship between the two of them was so good that he was a little envious. He even had the thought of finding a companion for a short while. Then, he smiled and let it go. There were thousands of flowers in the world. Why would he need to find a home? It was more reliable to pursue the supreme Tao. He should live freely. His disciple was just living a better life than him. He lived the way he wanted the most. Qin Yu had a beautiful woman by his side. He didn't delay in his realm at all. His progress was so fast that he almost surpassed him as the master. So much so that when he returned to the God realm, he couldn't even slack off. It seems that I also need to work hard. Otherwise, it would be too embarrassing if my disciple surpassed me in the future. He should also find a chance to break through. Chapter 968. Quick, they're right in front. I don't believe we can't catch that little bastard this time. A group of people wearing the same uniform. The weakest among them was at the immortal spirit realm. At first glance, there were more than 100 of them. Sichu Hua couldn't escape in the end and came to a cliff. He continued to move forward, but there was no path for him to go on. But if he turned back, he would only face countless enemies. Even if I die, I won't let you succeed. I don't believe that in the current wind boundary, it's actually still your word that rules. The dignified Sichu family has been turned into such a mess by you, Sichu Sheng. Where in this world is there a place for me, Sichu Hua, to stay? Then, he jumped into the water. He smashed a deep hole in the calm water. When the team of more than 100 experts came down to find him, they couldn't see him anymore. In the end, they could only go back and report. Sichu Sheng thought for a while, then sent out some more teams to continue searching along the river. If he was alive, he wanted to see him. If he was dead, he wanted to see his corpse. Kanshui Shenron had a good relationship with the Wind Realm's Sora Shenron. So, he came here first. Sora Shenron had always been elusive. Only the Kanshui Divine Dragon was able to find out where the other party had stopped. If it were other people, let alone seeing him, they couldn't even get any information. They traveled all over the world, going back and forth in the Wind Realm several times. They might not be able to find any clues. Qin Yu stepped out of the void, stepping on solid ground. He heard the sound of water as if it was right next to his ear. It wasn't like the water realm, which was full of water droplets. This wind realm seemed no different from usual. But the vegetation was exuberant and the water plants were abundant. It seemed that everywhere was exuding vitality. Wind, water, and wood are connected. Naturally, it has such an effect. Kang Yun has always liked this kind of natural environment. I'm afraid that most of the places he goes will return to nature like this. Kanshui Shenron shrunk his body, looking like a palm-sized snake. But after all, he was Shenron, an old monster who had lived for who knows how many years. He could be a guide. He had a lot more advantages than the others. If he was locked up and treated properly, he would lose this extremely useful tool to guide the way. He didn't know what Senzun did, but ever since he escaped from Senzun's hands, he had been very obedient. He even offered to lead the Shenron's way to help Qin Yu. Right now, there was an extremely wide river where they stood. The river water continued to flow downwards, but suddenly, a figure appeared in the upper stream. There was no need to care about strangers. However, that person didn't seem to be dead yet. He moved slightly and let out a weak cry for help. Shenron, 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 Shenron. Brother Qin, save me. When they reached the shore, they choked on water for a long time. Sichu Hua jumped directly into the water from a high altitude. Although the bones in his body were not shattered, they were broken into more than a dozen pieces. At this moment, his entire body felt limp and he couldn't exert any strength. I haven't seen you for a while. How did you end up like this? You even came to the Wind Realm. Since there were outsiders around, the Kanshue divine dragon hid itself. When this matter was brought up, Sichu Hua's face was filled with unwillingness. In the Wind World, the greatest power was not a sect, but a family clan. Among them, the Sichu clan was the most powerful. Originally, Sichu Hua was the only successor of the Sichu clan. Sichu Hua's uncle, Sichu Hua, was now the head of the family. But now that he had taken over the family's position, he kept sending people to kill Sichu Hua. As a result, he had no choice but to flee to other divine realms. In the end, he finally managed to recuperate for a period of time with great difficulty. But he had just returned to the Wind Realm when he was directly hunted down. He had no choice but to jump off the cliff and finally fell into the water. He was washed here by the current. And all the bones in his body were broken inch by inch, so he couldn't even struggle. There's a waterfall in front. There are countless submerged reefs there. If I go over in my current state, I'm afraid I'll die a horrible death. Qin Yu couldn't help but shake his head. The successor of the number one family had fallen to such a state. Being hunted down to the point where he didn't even have the strength to fight back. He didn't know how he used such a good identity to such a terrible situation. His talent was also considered good, but unfortunately, his brain didn't seem to be very good. If it was true, then how could Sichu Sheng not reveal his intentions from the beginning? And according to what Sichu Hua said, he still fell for a few tricks before he recognized Sichu Sheng's true colors. Sichu Hua saw a little of the meaning of this shake of the head. Inevitably, his face flushed red. He didn't want to be like this, but before experiencing so many unforeseen events, he never thought that someone would be so vicious. His Sichu clan's rules were very strict. So he never thought that someone would violate the clan's rules and even take the initiative to murder the clan's disciples. Let's not talk about these things for the time being. When he calmed down a little, Sichu Hua noticed that Qin Yu's strength had increased. Sichu Hua's eyes lit up. There was actually so much improvement in a short time. This feeling was too inconceivable. Then, his gaze fell on Xian Tian Senzun. An idea suddenly came to his mind. He forced himself to kneel on the ground with his body that had just recovered a little and kowtowed to the master and disciple. Please lend me a hand. You and your disciple are not ordinary people. I can see that you don't care about worldly affairs, but please help me on account of the fact that we have met once. As long as you help me take back the Sichu clan, I can give you more than half of the Sichu clan as a gift. More than half of the property of the number one family with the greatest power in the wind boundary sounded quite valuable. It was enough to tempt most of the powerhouses in the wind boundary, no matter how fickle and uninterested they were in worldly affairs. However, no one could refuse such a huge amount of resources. Most likely, the powerhouses who wanted to become a guest of the Sichu clan could break through the threshold. Sichu Hua swallowed his saliva nervously. He wasn't sure whether the master and disciple would help him or not, but he only had this hope left now. But the master and disciple were unwilling to help him. He really had no way to ask for help. Xian Tian Senzun looked at him and suddenly smiled at Qin Yu. What do you think? Qin Yu saw that smile and knew what was going on. If he didn't want to go, Xian Tian Senzun would have refused long ago. Chapter 969. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Xian Tian Senzun stood at the back with a smile. He knew that his disciple was telepathically connected to him and would definitely understand what he meant. Although this was a troublesome matter, it was a pleasure to help others, so why not? Qin Yu did not immediately agree, although he already had an idea in his heart. However, he still asked Sichu Hua what kind of reward he could offer. Sichu Hua was slightly excited, but he still endured the agitation and the pain in his body and reported a series of names of treasures. Every one of them was priceless, and he reported more than 100 of them before he stopped and took a sip of water to rest. However, the master and disciple were still unmoved. Even their expressions did not change at all. Finally, he thought of the blood feud that he carried. Sichu Hua finally gritted his teeth and revealed the secret that he had been hiding in the bottom of his heart. This was originally something that only the patriarch of the Sichu clan or the successor of the next patriarch could know. Of course, Sichu Sheng did not have the right to know. However, Sichu Hua was not too sure if he was the only one who knew about this. Because of this uncertainty, he directly told an outsider. Furthermore, the master and disciple duo could no longer be considered outsiders. Halfway through his words, he suddenly looked at Xuelan and hesitated. This is my wife. A blush suddenly appeared on Xuelan's snow-white face. Sichu Hua nodded with understanding. Since that was the case, he no longer had any scruples. He was not sure if Sichu Sheng had racked his brains for this secret and did not hesitate to hunt him down so that he could become the patriarch of the Sichu clan. After all, this news was so big that no one could completely throw it to the back of their minds. As the largest clan in the Wind Realm, no one could replace them for hundreds of thousands of years. The Sichu clan naturally had their own survival foundation. It was said that it was related to the legendary origin dragon. That was some information passed down from their ancestors. Due to his father's sudden death, he did not know much. He only knew that it was related to the origin dragon. Furthermore, he had inadvertently heard the name of a place from his father. It seemed to be closely related to this secret. If it's really as you said, the location is convenient and closely related, how do you know Sichu Sheng didn't go there in advance? Perhaps he has already uncovered this so-called secret in advance and has been chasing you all this time just to silence you and prevent others from finding out. Qin Yu only asked the most important question. Although it sounded like a good idea, the risks involved were huge. Moreover, these words sounded more and more unreliable. If he was really so powerful and had something to do with the origin dragon, why had the Sichu clan always been just a clan? Moreover, the position of patriarch had been snatched away by a branch family. Sichu Hua looked a little embarrassed. Actually, he couldn't guarantee anything. He only said what he knew. Although there were suspicions that he was trying to avoid the trivial, he had no intention of hiding it. Since he was asked, he answered truthfully. He wasn't sure himself. He couldn't guarantee how much he would be able to obtain now. All they could do was try their best to find outside help. Perhaps they could even find a way to take back everything that was supposed to belong to them. I can't guarantee whether this is true or not. Maybe it's more of a legend. However, you can rest assured that I won't do something like this. If you help me, I can give you half of the Sichu clan. Anything that isn't the most important and will affect the clan's destruction. Even if it's some extremely precious natural treasures or some extremely precious inheritance. You can take whatever you like as long as you help me this time. Qin Yu smiled and reached out to pull him up from the ground. If that's the case, I'll agree. Sichu Hua finally shed tears of joy. All of this was the best news for him. He had witnessed the abilities of this pair of master and disciple with his own eyes. So what if he couldn't do it for the time being? As long as the master and disciple were willing to help him if they lost. At least from now on, he wouldn't be fighting alone. Moreover, with the abilities that this pair of master and disciple had shown before, he had absolute confidence that he would be able to turn things around this time. He would chase that ingrate, Sichu Sheng, down from his position as the patriarch. Although he had agreed to Sichu Hua's request now, it was impossible for them to directly fly to the Sichu clan's residence now. There was a pool of wind there. There were countless whirlwinds around it. They were like blades that strangled anyone who didn't use the correct method to pass through. One had to use an extremely special password and movement technique to open it. Originally, Sichu Hua could enter and exit it freely. He had great authority, but he dared not be sure now. After all, he had been chased out of the clan, and his ruthless uncle would definitely not let him live. If he were to change the incantation for entering and exiting based on this, he would undoubtedly die when the time came. With his current abilities, he didn't have the ability to force his way through. The pool of wind? It's just some small wind blades. As long as we forcefully open a path, we can go anywhere in the world. Shen-Tian Senzun didn't take this matter to heart at all, and he snorted disdainfully after hearing it. Not to mention his current abilities, even if it was 10,000 years ago, or even earlier when he was young and impetuous, he wouldn't take this thing seriously. It was fine if this kind of thing was used to fool people outside, but those with some ability and knowledge might not be unable to see it. It could be broken through forcefully. As long as one could block the attack of the wind blades, one could come and go freely. Even in this wind realm, there were many powerhouses who could reach this point. Those people didn't force their way through only because they were afraid of the Sichu clan's reputation as the #1 clan. Otherwise, if they wanted to, they had plenty of ways to break through the so-called extremely powerful barrier outside. Wouldn't it be easy to get in and out? Therefore, what was really used to guard against could only be other more secretive things. If it was true, there were no other means of defense other than these wind blades. That was to have absolute confidence in one's own abilities. No matter who came, they would definitely not be able to escape unscathed. Sichu Hua was a little stunned. It seemed that he didn't expect this so-called powerful defense. In the eyes of the powerhouses, it was merely a toy used as a deterrent. What people were truly afraid of was the Sichu clan itself, not the so-called pool of wind. But the people in the clan all think so. At least the younger generation of my generation and some of the more remote branches all seem to be proud of this.